Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback.
Good morning. Good morning. Boy, are we excited to have you here. I don't know if I've ever been at a meeting with a more diverse group of people than what's here, and around a single, simple, direct cause of religious freedom, which we all stand for here and around the world. That's what it's about. And we are oversubscribed. If we could have a room twice the size, it would be full. 3 times the size, it would be full, because so many people are so passionate and in need of this topic. And you're going to hear from some people who have directly experienced the persecution themselves. Right over here, we've got a section of folks that are going to be speaking at different times throughout the conference that have been persecuted for their faith. And those firsthand stories, there's nothing more powerful than hearing what people have experienced themselves. You'll hear the first 2 of those this morning, but we have some of them here. If you're going to be a person that's speaking because you've been persecuted for your faith, would you please stand up so we could recognize you briefly and quickly? There's some. Yesterday we started with a powerful session at the Holocaust Museum. And it was amazing to go through there with these individuals. They are touring it, seeing what had happened in that persecution, the Holocaust that had occurred. And one of them came up to me and said how unimaginative evil is. Keeps doing the same thing, horribly, horrifically. And yet our task is to stop that. is to stop that from continuing to take place. And that's what we're going to move to do. This is the first ever ministerial to advance religious freedom that in our account and recollection and review of history has ever taken place. We're absolutely delighted you're here for this truly historic event. I've already had interesting pictures taken with different people of different faiths standing side by side, smiling, joyous, and I look forward to many more of those taking place. We have members of the faith community of Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, Baha'i, Yazidi, and other groups. We were as inclusive as possible because we wanted to include everyone of every faith or no faith at all, everyone who cares about religious freedom and who will join us in this cause. And all that was intentional because religious freedom really truly is for everyone. It's a right given by God and is a beautiful part of our human dignity. Your presence is an encouragement to people of faith around the world that someone cares about their plight and will fight to promote and defend their freedom. Your presence speaks to the importance of religious freedom. Yet, unfortunately, a large majority of the world live in countries or areas where the freedom to practice their own faith is severely limited, prohibited, or in extreme cases, deadly. People across the globe are being oppressed, brutalized, and killed for seeking to practice their faith or live according to their beliefs. Others face persecution, discrimination, and harassment. This cannot be allowed to continue. Last month, I went to Nigeria, where I saw up close the terrible destruction by terrorism of faith communities, scores of Christians and Muslims killed. In Burma, the situation in northern Rakhine State constitutes ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya, a religious minority. In Iraq, religious minority groups of Yazidis and Christians victimized by ISIS are still in dire needs of security and assistance. In Turkey, Pastor Andrew Brunson remains wrongfully imprisoned on false charges. In China, large number of Uyghur Muslims are being sent to re-education camps. Tibetan Buddhists face significant restrictions in organizing their own faith, and Christian house church leaders are imprisoned. The lack of religious freedom anywhere is a threat to peace, prosperity, and stability everywhere. The right to freedom of religion and the ability to live according to the dictates of your own soul is under attack in the world. This must change. And that's why you're here. This is a noble cause, but it's also a very practical one. Where religious freedom is promoted, economic opportunity grows, security increases, and people flourish. Countries seeking to be more free and economically prosperous must devote themselves to protecting this fundamental right of humanity. Protection for this freedom, along with the freedoms of peaceful assembly, association, and expression, are foundations for a flourishing society. So ours is a great task. If successful, more people around the world will experience a burst of freedom that they have never known, a freedom that will yield great improvements for humanity and an expanding atmosphere of peace. We cannot afford to fail. Let us redouble our efforts to expand religious freedom. Now, here's where you come in. We need you in this cause. If we're to make progress, we need more people to get in the ring, to fight for religious freedom, and to advance it worldwide. We need all of you and many more. And that's why your participation here is so vital. Civil society groups are often the first reporters of atrocities and persecution. You're often the first to offer support to those who desperately need it. You are on the front lines. The role of civil society cannot be overstated in helping us win this fight. And that's why we're dedicating 2 days of this ministerial to engaging with civil society groups like yourselves, to empower you, but to also learn from you. We rely on your contributions now to inform our annual International Religious Freedom Report and your efforts to press governments to act. We rely on your insight to better understand where persecution, discrimination, or violence is heating up. And we look to you to help us craft the right responses to impact the most people. We need you to help us equip individuals to understand their rights, to empower them to assert their rights, and fight for them when governments or non-state actors seek to infringe upon those rights. Reflecting the importance we place in your voice, I began convening weekly roundtable meetings with a number of you in this room, where civil society groups would come together and we would exchange what's taking place and promote each other's efforts and actions. We need better coordination and action within the broader religious and advocacy community. That's a good part of what these two-day seminars are about. We need partnerships in the defense, the security, the foreign affairs, the foreign aid communities to help us pursue universal respects for this freedom. We need your help using the media and technology platforms to fight against intolerance and xenophobia targeting religious communities. And we as the United States government need to integrate religious freedom further into our national security strategies, our economic strategies, and our assistance programs. And you'll hear from a number of government officials that will talk about that. We must commit to using all the might, the machinery, and the moral authority we have to stop those nations and actors who trample on free souls. We need to do that. We need that. And furthermore, I think we have a solemn obligation to do so. Every organization, every group, and every individual has an important role to play in helping us win this fight. We know we cannot get this done on our own. We need your help. And also, I would just ask you to think for just a moment about those people in various countries around the world right now that are praying that we're successful. They've heard maybe something is taking place, that somebody's starting to look at this, that somebody's starting to be interested in their plight. They have no way out. They can't see a way out. But they know somebody's starting to talk about them and to get organized. And you give them hope. Hope that they'll have a better day, that it's coming. I have heard too many groups that I've worked with over the years that they started to change, and hope came once they started to hear somebody was talking about them and actually interested. And it started motivating them. They're doing that now as we meet here. And furthermore, we need your faith in action to move the world to not just tolerance of differences, although that's important. But unfortunately, that bar is just too low. We must move to a place where people genuinely care and love one another, no matter our differences. You must help us get there. Together, an alliance of government, civil society, and faith, we can and will advance religious freedom. With your engagement and leadership, we know the promotion of this universal human right will happen. Let's get it done. Now, I'm excited about this next section because this is the testimony of the people that so motivate me all the time. As I travel around the world, I meet with people that have been persecuted, and it is their experience that just makes my blood boil so many times to hear that somebody's treated that way. And I want to do something against it. Well, now you're going to hear the first of many stories that are going to be featured of survivors, those who've experienced what we hope and pray no one else will have to repeat. It's my honor to introduce the first two, representing two persecuted religious communities in China, Christians and Uyghur Muslims. Jamie Powell is our first survivor to speak. She's here on behalf of her husband, Pastor Cao John Sanchang, to represent the persecuted Protestant house church members in China. After Chinese authorities harassed John for decades due to his pastoral and ministry work in China, John decided to focus on humanitarian work in Burma to help educate impoverished and vulnerable children. Chinese authorities detained him last year and convicted him this March when he attempted to return to China from Burma. Authorities sentenced him to 7 years in prison. After Jamie speaks, we'll hear from Tahir Hammoud, representing the Uyghur Muslim community. We're deeply concerned by the Chinese government's long-standing efforts to suppress Uyghur Muslims and Tibetan Buddhists. We are particularly troubled by reports of the Chinese government's deepening crackdown on Uyghurs and members of other Muslim minority groups in China. One example is the detention of hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs and other Muslims in facilities ranging from makeshift holding centers to prisons, ostensibly for political re-education. Most Uyghurs know someone, including members of their own family, who have been detained in these camps, unable to communicate with them for indefinite periods of time, without any apparent legal authority, fair legal process, or remedy. The reports we are receiving about these camps are horrific and shock the conscience. I know we're all eager to hear their stories. I want to thank you, Jamie, and Tahir, for your willingness to speak today. Jamie Powell.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Ambassador Brownback, and the members of the United States State Department who have worked long hours to prepare for us today. We appreciate their hospitality. Thank you also to Secretary of State Pompeo for envisioning this ministerial and for giving us the opportunity to share our personal stories with you. I'm truly grateful for the State Department's compassionate care for our family since the very beginning of our crisis. Many people know my husband, John, is a pastor, living a simple life in pursuit of spreading the word of God. Others know him as a humanitarian, as he has built 16 schools in impoverished areas of Burma. The Chinese government, however, sees him as a criminal. He's been convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison. My oldest son, Amos, is here with me today, and we're here to represent him, Reverend John Chow, a Christian pastor who's been held for the past 17 months. John and I met here in the United States when he came here to study theology. I had just returned from teaching English in China for 2 years. He earned his Master's of Divinity degree here in New York, but rejected the comfortable life in America to return to his homeland and devoted decades of his life establishing English and Bible training centers for new believers. Spreading education was not just the side goal of my husband. In his call from God, education was the vehicle in which to enable freedom from poverty and moral wrongs. To this end, he constructed primary schools in China, in Yunnan Province and Guizhou Province. These schools were not only built with transparency, but they were later turned over to the government for further development. Despite this, he was frequently questioned, subject to scrutiny and surveillance. In 2012, John visited the Kachin people of Myanmar and was shocked by the poverty and quality of life that he saw. Malnourished children without clothes, child mortality rates very high. He witnessed this makeshift school with a pig pen adjacent to the classroom. Upon seeing this, he exclaimed, "Being a Christian, after praying to God, I discovered this is my job, to provide them with help within my ability." Alongside volunteers from churches, he developed a poverty alleviation and education project for the Wa people. He led this combined effort to establish 16 schools that were sanctioned by the Shan state of Myanmar. Truck by truck, tons of supplies were delivered high into the mountains for the local ethnic minority peoples, valued at thousands of dollars. The program's extended goals were to provide medical care and drug resistance programs there in the Golden Triangle area. John and his teachers literally went door to door, begging the families to stay away from drugs. On March 5th, 2017, John and another teacher were arrested by the Chinese Border Patrol in what appears to be no coincidence. It is clear to us now that John was set up for this arrest because of his faith-driven work and accused of a fabricated crime, facilitating organized border crossing, a charge that is usually given to human traffickers. Since his detainment, my husband has suffered a rapid decline in his health. He has lost 50 pounds. He's not been able to communicate with me and my children. My son and I traveled there 10,000 miles, and we were not allowed to see him. The 7-year sentence he's been unjustly received now becomes a matter of health and survival. So I ask for solidarity with my family against the arrest of this pastor. The last picture is of a middle school that he helped to build. The name of this school is Righteous Stream Middle School. The first character, E, means righteous. The second word, Tren, means stream. These two words come from the verse in Amos 5:24. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. God is righteous and just. He calls for mankind to act with justice. I ask that members of civil society and government officials take note of the imprisonment of people of faith in China. Please help protect them and speak out for them. Please remember Pastor John Saul, imprisoned in Yunnan province, and others like him. Please assist our family in any way that you can in our work to obtain his freedom. Thank you so much.
Tunuştuğunuzga rahmet. Elçi Braunbeck efendimge, Devlet İşleri Katibi Pompeo efendimge, şundaqla meni bu yerga taklif qilgan hammanglarga rahmet.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Ambassador Braunbeck, Secretary Pompeo, and others for inviting me to here to speak today.
Hürmetli hanımlar, efendiler, atiganlikinglar xayrlik bolsun.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Mening ismim Tahir Hamud. Men bir şair hem rejissor. Men Şinjan Uyghur Avtonom rayonida tug'ilgan. Bu rayonning ismi asli Sharqiy Turkiston.
My name is Tahir Hamud. I am a poet and film director. I was born in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, an area previously known as East Turkestan.
Uyg'urlar Turkiy millat bo'lib, islom diniga e'tiqod qiladi. 1949-yildan boshlab Xitoy kommunistik hokimiyati Uyg'urlarga qarata qabih siyosiy harakatlarni yurgizib keldi.
Uyghurs are a Turkic people with Islamic faith. Since 1949, the Chinese Communist Party has launched brutal political campaigns targeting them.
Uyg'urlar orasida menga o'xshash o'zining milliy kimligi yoki diniy e'tiqodi tufaylidan ziyonkashlikka uchragan kishilar nihoyat ko'p. Men bugun bu yerda Uyg'urlarning qanday qo'rqinch va vahim ichida yashayotganligini sizlarga bayon qilmoqchi.
Uyghurs, like myself, have been persecuted and have suffered because of their ethnicity and religious beliefs. I am here today to tell you about how the Uyghur population is now living in horror.
2016-yilning oxiridan boshlab Xitoy hukumati Uyg'ur rayonini bir saqchi davlatiga va usti uchuq turmaga aylantirdi.
Since late 2016, China has turned the Uyghur region into a police state and open prison.
Xitoy hukumati sun'iy idrok, ovoz va chiroy tunish texnikasi, umumyuzlik telefon tekshirish, DNA avrishkisini majburiy yig'ish qatorliq yuqori texnikalik taqib sistemasi orqali Uyg'urlarning kundalik hayotini nazorat qilmoqda.
The Chinese government is using advanced surveillance technologies such as AI, voice and face recognition, mass surveillance of cell phones, and forced DNA collection to control Uyghurs' daily lives.
Uyg'urlarning diniy e'tiqodi mislsiz cheklamaga uchramoqda. Xitoy hukumati diniy kitoblarni ko'ydiydi va yig'ib oldi. Masjidlarni chaqdi. Burun qonunliq bo'lgan diniy faoliyatlar endi qonunsiz jinoyatga aylanib, Uyg'urlarni jazolashning bahonasi bo'ldi.
There are unprecedented restrictions on the religious lives of Uyghurs. The government has confiscated and burned religious books and demolished mosques. Religious activities that were once legal are now illegal and an excuse for persecution.
Xitoyning milliy zulmi Uyg'urlarning o'chmanligini va erkinlikka bo'lgan intilishini texnik kuchaytirdi.
China's oppression of Uyghurs based on their ethnicity has led to a growing resentment and desire for freedom among my people.
11 sentabr vaqasidan keyin Xitoy hukumati terrorlikqa qarshi turishni bahona qilib, Uyg'urlarni bostirishni texnik kuchaytirdi. Afsuslanarligi xalqaro jamiyatning sukut qilishi Xitoyning bu bostirishlarini hassilab oshiribdi.
China intensified this repression after 9/11 under the name of fighting against terrorism. The international community's silence on China's actions has emboldened China to double down on its oppression.
Xitoy hukumati Uyg'urlarni qayta tarbiyalash o'rni deb ataladigan jazo lagerlariga qamadi. Navbatda 1 milliondan ortiq Uyg'ur shu xildagi lagerlarda tutib turilmoqda. Echinishliqi bu kishilarning jinoyatining nima ekanligi, nada tutib turilayotganligi, qandoq bir taraf qilinganligi va qachon qo'yib berilganligi aniq emas. Kishilarning bu lagerlarda ko'plab kasal bo'layotganligi va o'lib ketayotganligi oshkorlanyapti.
The Chinese government has also sent Uyghurs to so-called re-education camps, which are concentration camps. Currently, more than 1 million Uyghurs are held in these camps. There is no due process. No one knows why they are detained, where they are kept, if or when they will be released. We hear that people are suffering from illness and dying in these camps.
Xitoy hukumatining Uyg'urlarni diniy jihatdan bostirishi hatto chet ellarga kengaydi. O'tgan yili Misr Azhar universitetidan xohlagancha tutilib, Xitoyga qaytirib ketilgan Uyg'ur o'quvchilarning hozirgacha izdirki yo'q.
China's religious persecution of Uyghurs has reached beyond its borders. Uyghur students from Azhar University in Egypt were arbitrarily detained and returned to China last year. Their whereabouts are still unknown.
Xitoy hukumatining Uyg'urlarni diniy jihatdan bostirishi mana mushundaq ig'ir holat tutmoqda.
So the religious persecution of Uyghurs are so much in their situation.
Men 1996-yili Turkiyaga o'qishga chiqmoqchi bo'lib, sazgir materiallarni chegirdan elib chiqmoqchi bo'lgan degan batnam bilan tutilib, 3 yillik emgak bilan tarbiyalashga hukm qilingan. Shu chaqda men turgan emgak bilan tarbiyalash o'rnida jazolanayotgan 350 ga yaqin mahbusning mutlaq ko'pi Uyg'ur bo'lib, bularning taxminan 230ni siyosiy jinoyatchi, ya'ni o'zini siyosiy ko'z qarashi yoki diniy e'tiqodi tufaylidan jazolanayotganlar edi.
In 1996, I was detained when I was leaving China to study in Turkey and sentenced to 3 years in a labor camp on a false charge of trying to provide sensitive materials to overseas separatist forces. At that time, there were about 350 prisoners at the camp I were served. The majority of them were Uyghurs, and about 230 were political prisoners charged for their religious beliefs or political views.
Jazo muddatim to'shib qo'yib berilganda o'qituvchilik xizmatimdan allaqachon ayrilib qolgan edim. Shuningdan boshlab men Xitoy hukumati menga dushmanlik bilan muomala qiladigan rejim ostida yashashga majbur bo'ldim.
When I was released, I had lost my teaching job. I had to live in a country in which the regime viewed me as an enemy.
2009-yili 5-iyulda Urumchida Xitoy kuchlarining Uyg'urlarga qartilgan cho'ng qirg'inchiligi yuz berdi. Shu yil 3-sentabrda Xitoy ko'chmanlari Urumchi ko'chalariga chiqib, Uyg'urlarga keng ko'lamda hujum qildi. Men ularning hujumiga uchrab ig'ir yaralandim. Urib o'ltirib etilgan, doktorxonalarda o'lib ketgan va ig'ir yaralangan Uyg'urlarni o'z ko'zim bilan ko'rdim.
On July 5, 2009, the Chinese government brutally suppressed Uyghurs with armed force in Urumqi. On September 3rd, Chinese migrants attacked Uyghurs on the streets. I witnessed Uyghurs being severely injured, hospitalized, and even beaten to death. I myself was severely beaten and injured.
2017-yili martdan boshlab Uyg'urlarning pasportlari yig'ib olindi. Chet elga chiqqanlar va ishonchli emas deb chekit qo'yilganlar turkum-turkumlab tutqun qilinib, jazo lagerlariga qamalishga boshladi.
In March 2017, the government confiscated the passports of Uyghurs. Uyghurs with a history of international travel were labeled as untrustworthy, detained, and sent to concentration camps.
2017 yil avgustda men qizimni davolataman deb oilam bilan birga chet elga qochib chiqdik.
In August 2017, my family and I were able to leave the country to seek medical treatment for my daughter.
Biz bir oila Amerikaga chiqib uzun o'tmay bizdan o'ch olish uchun saqchilar ayolimning ikki inisini tutqun qildi. Shundaqdimi men Uyg'ur rayonida ko'rgan va bo'layotgan ahvollarni xalqaro taratqularga oshkorladim. Shu sababdan mening bir inim tutqun qilindi.
Soon after we arrived to the United States, local police detained two of my brothers-in-law in retribution. Despite this, I still shared what I had seen in the Uyghur region with international media. This has led to the detention of one of my brothers.
Xuddi chet eldagi barliq Uyg'urlarga o'xshash, mening urug' tuqqanlarim bilan bo'lgan aloqam butunlay uzildi. Hozir ularning o'lik yoki tirik ekanligini bilmayman.
Like all other Uyghurs living in exile, I cannot contact with my relatives at home. I don't know whether they are alive or not.
Shuningga ishonamanki, xuddi natsistlar Yahudilarni qirg'in qilgandek, Xitoy hukumatining Uyg'urlarni jazo lagerlarida keng ko'lamda qirg'in qilish ehtimolligi bor.
I believe the Chinese government is likely to carry out mass killings of Uyghurs in concentration, like the Nazis did to Jewish people.
Shunga men xalqaro jamiyatni, ya'ni har qaysi davlat hukumatlarini va tashkilotlarni Uyg'urlarning ahvoliga yaqindan diqqat qilishga va ko'ngil bilishga, Xitoy hukumatini Uyg'urlarning kishilik huquqlariga hurmat qilishga undashga, hamda Uyg'urlarning diniy e'tiqodi va milliy kimligiga kafolatlik qilib, o'z taqdirini o'z belgilash huquqini qo'llashga chaqiraman.
In closing, I call on the international community, governments and organizations to pay close attention to and raise their concerns about the Uyghur situation, urge the Chinese government to respect Uyghurs' human rights, and support the protection of Uyghurs' religious and ethnic identities and self-determination.
Hammanglar rahmat.
Thank you all.
Rahmat.
Thank you very much, Jamie and Tahir, for your testimony. And I witnessed of what we are about stopping is that people being persecuted for their faith. They're doing simple things. They're just practicing their own faith. They're doing tasks that they're helping society. We want to see that people are free to do those things. It's a simple ask. It's a good thing for a country. And that's what we need to be about, and that's what we are about. Thank you both very much. Let's give them another round of applause again. Thank you very much. We'll now go into our first panel. I invite you to stay seated as the panel comes up, and we'll get started with that part of the program. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director of Innovation in the Office of Global Partnerships, Jim Thompson.
Chris, you're down here? Okay. So good morning. I'm excited to see all of you here, and definitely a sobering panel, a sobering message to follow following that incredible outpouring in stories. I want the world to hear these stories, and we want all of you to be helping us tell those stories, and we want to help you tell your stories too. One way we need to do that is by taking out this. So I know, I can see the millennials already have this in your hands. You can laugh. I would like everyone to feel free, take out your cell phone, your iPhone, your smartphone, whatever you have. We are tweeting today. You will find internet service here in the room. There's Wi-Fi. If you go onto your settings and look for SWAP, you will find, if you go into your Wi-Fi, you will look for SWAP. Please join us online. We're actually going to use Twitter during this panel discussion, so we want you to be tweeting at us. If you would like to follow me on Twitter so that we can get the conversation heard around the world and not just in this room, I am Jim at State, and our hashtag for today and for the rest of this week is hashtag religious freedom. So we're not trending yet in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot of people in this room. Normally, a crowd this size, we would be trending. So I really do invite you to take this out. And that's what happens when you ask the Director of Innovation to come and lead a panel on religious freedom. So thank you all for joining us today. I have some amazing panelists joining me to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing and the work that foundations can do. So I know you guys are interested in what government's doing. We want to talk a little bit about what the foundations are doing and what private sector's doing and how you can work with them. And that's the subject this morning that we invite you to join us on. So I'm actually going to start at the far end and start with my friend Natalie. Natalie, tell us who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about the work that you do.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Ross. I'm the Vice President for External Relations at the Council on Foundations. We are an almost 70-year-old organization that works with philanthropy here in the United States and around the world. We represent over 1,000 foundations and work to really help them be more effective in impacting social change on all kinds of issues. Here in the United States, you may know there are over 100,000 foundations. Many of those institutions work on issues that are relevant to the work you may be doing here in the United States or around the world. As an institution, we do a lot of things, including working to enable philanthropy to be able to operate, to support civil society globally and domestically on all kinds of issues, looking at the laws and regulations that govern philanthropy and nonprofits here in the U.S. We know that philanthropy last year, according to our latest studies, foundations themselves contribute about $68 billion in grants, domestically and internationally. About 30% of that went to programs overseas. So U.S. philanthropy is generous. It's also both domestic and global. And I look forward to talking about how that may be relevant to your work.
All right, my good friend Ed Martin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning. I'm very grateful to be here and grateful to Jim and Ambassador Brownback and the folks at Global Partnerships at State. I've worked with them for a long time and have a lot of respect for that group. My name is Ed Martin. I'm a CEO of a company called Good Exchange. Actually, we were just acquired recently by another public benefit corporation called the Fifth Element Group. And we look at frontier technologies to solve areas like sustainable development goals. And so the focus for us is really to look at how the machine from the corporation generally works And if we can expend our financing in a way that optimizes the spend and at the same time elevates sustainable development goals, that becomes a virtuous circle effectively. And so what we try to do is make it a systems change versus kind of a one-off. And so our whole focus now is both on the financing side. So there's about $23 trillion in the financing side looking for social impact type work. And then there's also on the marketing side. There's about $2 trillion in marketing trying to sell products to people all around the world. And we simply are trying to look at how to drive more profitable growth with that $2 trillion, but in a way to lift people at the same time. So deeply grateful to be here and looking forward to the panel.
That reminds me of someone once said $1 billion here, $1 billion there. You're actually now talking about trillions, so really interesting. Okay, JD, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So my name's JP DeGance, and I'm with the Philanthropy Roundtable. We're a membership organization of individual wealth creators as well as institutional donors from around the U.S., American-based funders, and my experience and background has been working and serving the high net worth American philanthropic community. And it's something, you know, the frame up of the panel is a great one, and how we can work more closely with civil society, and that's obviously our organization's mission. American Philanthropy accounts for last year $400 billion of total giving, of which 5% came from corporations, 15% came from foundations, and the balance came from individual donors. 71% of philanthropy came from individual living donors, and 9% came from bequests from individual donors who had recently passed away. So foundations are an important way to seek grants. I would encourage you also to think in terms of other ways to engage the American philanthropic community. Foundations are terrific. They involve a bit of a complexity in sale. So, you know, there's a process, there's a grant timeline, and oftentimes individual wealth creators there's just easier ways to approach than say a corporate or foundation community. So I can chat a little bit about that.
So far we've heard just quickly from my colleagues that represent the largest foundations, represent the corporate industry and sort of their work around foundations, and then individuals. And I'd like Chris Stewart, who actually comes from the foundation community, tell us a little bit about your perspectives on foundations and the work on religious freedom specifically.
Good morning. My name is Chris Stewart. I'm the Chief Grants Officer of the Templeton Religion Trust, which is organized in the Caribbean and operates from offices in Nassau, the Bahamas, where our founder, Sir John Templeton, lived from the 1960s until his death in 2008. TRT is one of 3 independent foundations established by Sir John, the other 2 being the John Templeton Foundation, which is based in the United States, and the Templeton World Charity Foundation, with which we share an office in Nassau. TRT and Templeton World Charity were both chartered in the 1980s, but by design were not activated until after Sir John's death, when their considerable endowments were released from his estate, and professional staff, like me, were recruited to set up the grant-making platform. On this panel and throughout the day, you're going to hear lots of advice about the process of obtaining funding. I wanted to take a moment to describe TRT's general approach to the issues that are going to be addressed in this ministerial. Generally speaking, obtaining funding isn't simply a matter of understanding the application process. It's also about aligning your programs with the mission and mindset of the funders. We fund both research and what we call engagement, excuse me, which is about the dissemination of research, as well as advocacy. These are the sorts of activities that we fund. But before we go to questions, I want to focus just for a few moments on why we're interested in religious freedom and how we approach it. Sir John Templeton regarded religion as a dynamic pro-social force, a force for good in the world. part of and even a source of solutions to the wide range of problems we face, like poverty and sickness and even conflict. A basic premise for Sir John is that we collectively know less than 1% of what he called spiritual reality. He believed that progress is possible in at least 3 respects. First, with respect to new discoveries about spiritual reality, or what he sometimes referred to as the work and purpose of the Creator, discoveries that deepen and enrich existing traditions. Secondly, with respect to the massive social dividend that he associated with religious faith and practice at its best, as well as thirdly, with respect to spiritual growth, by which we mean the creation of more and more diverse expressions of religious faith and practice. And the key to progress in each of these respects is to foster constructive engagement across religious differences. With respect to religion, Sir John was a pluralist, not an ecumenist. We're not looking for some religious lowest common denominator. It's the contrast between alternative perspectives on a single reality that is the engine of progress. As a student of world religions, Sir John understood that the impulse to spirituality and the yearning for transcendence is universal. He also understood the forces that can, and sometimes have, led to the obsolescence of particular religions, such as lack of humility or imagination, or inflexibility and closed-mindedness on the part of religions, particularly in their leaders, to ideas from sources outside themselves, whether that means other religions or even the sciences. Echoing something Ambassador Brownback said in his opening remarks, we don't talk a lot about tolerance. Not because tolerance isn't a good thing, but because it's too easy to combine tolerance with indifference. We tolerate things we don't like back pain or toothaches. We're more interested in what you have to add to diversity and tolerance to arrive at pluralism. And that additional ingredient is engagement. Across and in full awareness of and appreciation of our differences, without coercion, on a level playing field. We think that any effective strategy in this area should be characterized by humility, empathy, and patience. And TRT seeks to partner with people and programs that embody and express these virtues. We're also interested in developing these character traits in people and populations, because without them, we don't think we're going to get very far. And finally, the conditions we seek to create in partnership with advocates and other funders include respect for liberty of conscience, which includes the freedom to orient or reorient one's life in accordance with our ever-deepening and sometimes changing beliefs. An environment of learning and increasing religious literacy, and a recognition that at the end of the day, all religious liberty, like all politics, is local. Although we think globally, we act locally, so we're interested in local expressions of these ideals. All of this comes together to create the conditions necessary for covenantal pluralism that moves beyond tolerance to embrace mutually respectful engagement with people of other faiths and of no faith, a commitment to seeking joint solutions to shared problems, the absence of coercion, unfettered access to spiritual information, and the integration, not assimilation, of minorities. That is our vision, and as a funder, we're interested in partnerships with people and institutions that share it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It very nicely sets the stage for this discussion, too, so I really do appreciate that. Each of you represent, as I said, the sort of the different funders that are out there. JP talked a little bit about individuals and sort of the magnitude that they have in funding. Ed knows the corporate world, corporate foundations, but also celebrities and the work that they're doing on all sorts of different topics around the world. And obviously, Natalie comes from the Council on Foundations, which is the granddaddy of organizations that looks after all of the largest foundations in the United States and represents them. I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about some of the funders? Can we name some names here of funders that are out there? And a little bit about the work that they're doing. Natalie, I'm gonna throw you under the bus. Have you go first. And I will say, Natalie, tell us a little bit. You come from the faith-based community as well previously before you took this role. So I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been at the council 4 years, and before that, I spent time as a program officer at a global operating foundation that is faith-inspired with the Aga Khan Foundation, which works in South and Central Asia, East and West Africa, very focused on pluralism and this idea of how we can embrace difference and celebrate and not just tolerate that difference. So I really appreciated those remarks and looking at pluralism. So in American philanthropy, I think there's a long history of faith-inspired foundations, of institutions that give perhaps within a single faith because they care very much, and the founders of that foundation are very committed to the ideals of that faith. And then there's also foundations that care about interfaith or pluralistic approaches and really want to fund around how foundations can come together and be celebrated in their differences. And so that history is hand in hand with the history of American philanthropy, and you see that across the foundation spectrum. We at the council at this moment today in America are working with a number of foundations who are very interested in religious interfaith tolerance, really looking at pluralism and how we can rebuild that ethos in America. So we had an event sponsored by many funders in that space earlier this year, exploring philanthropy's role and foundations specifically as institutional donors in exploring interfaith relations in America. So whether those be funders from the Catholic side, so you see a number of foundations like GHR Foundation, which you may know of, not as well known in Minneapolis, who's very committed and has a history of funding around the Catholic faith. The Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, based in LA, who has a long history of funding the Catholic faith and sisters. The Arthur Vining Davis Foundation here on the West Coast, the long history of looking at faith. All three of those institutions are looking at their faith history and thinking about how can we also not just fund around our Catholic backgrounds, but also look at interfaith and pluralism and what pluralism looks like domestically and globally around the world. And at the same time, you have institutional funders very committed to funding around the Jewish faith, for example. There are many of those across the United States, and the Muslim faith as well. And so that institutional commitment to faith-based giving, I think, is inherent in philanthropy across the United States. Funders who are small, but to funders who are very, very large. And you, over time, have seen some movement. So one example is the Ford Foundation, although not faith-inspired or faith-based as a giver, used to have a religion-based funding program. They no longer do as a standalone focus of their work, but they look at all of their work through the lens of inequality. And so they still fund faith-based institutions and work with faith-based partners on their work through the lens of how do you address inequality. And so I think that's also important, that it's not just institutional foundations who have a faith pillar or fund a faith or religion program that care about religious freedom or care about the ability of groups to thrive wherever they are here in the US or around the world. And so for some foundations, it's not about categorizing their work as about religious freedom or faith-based, but really about how do they work with faith-based civil society groups and partners on all kinds of issues ranging from inequality to poverty to hunger, et cetera.
Fantastic. And Ed, tell us a little bit, particularly the work that you've done with corporations and kind of like the win-win when you get to marketing. It's a really important topic for people to understand. Many of the people in the room either come from non-governmental organizations or from faith-based organizations, and I'm sure they'll find this fascinating.
Sounds great. Thank you. So a lot of people in the corporate sector, who would generally, if that's just of a show of hands, think corporate people are good people in general? Kind of a few of you, so-so. I'll tell you what, since the early 90s, I've been doing this kind of work, and most of the people that I run into, to be perfectly honest with you, want to do something of significance and value, and they just don't know exactly how to go about it. And so one of the things that Jim mentioned, and one of the biggest funding areas, I think that if you look at it from your own perspective and your own work, you should look at perhaps considering that as an option, is looking at the people that you reach within your organizations, the reach that you have, the cultural idiosyncrasies in terms of understanding that consumer target, that market, and that group that these brands are trying to get to is huge. Companies spend billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars, and oftentimes it would be a guy like me, out to some place in Lagos, Nigeria, stare through a window for 3 days, and then come back and report back out like, Eureka, I now know the market, we should sell this way. That's not a super useful ROI as it relates to investment side. Folks in this room represent marketplaces where there is deep insight, deep understanding, and where brands desperately need to go. I started my career kind of doing this shared value, triple bottom line type of work at the Kellogg Company in the early 90s. And people used to come to me for money all the time. They'd say, hey, Ed, you work for a big company. How about some money? And I said, well, that seems good, but I don't work on the foundation, and I don't work on the giving side. I don't even know where those people sit. So I would try to not come back and say no, because it feels bad when you come back and say no, and it's for an orphans initiative or poverty or education. And then I realized who has more money in my company than anybody? And I realized, like, hey, that's my budget. That's like all my money. And so I started looking at it from a marketing perspective, and so I started using the theme, who else wins when I win, with every marketing campaign as I started to look at it. And then I started thinking, like, okay, well, if most humans buy something of some sort, and I can engage those people in a way that's more profitable for my company, because now consumers are actually turning towards my brand, and they're turning towards my brand because it's engaging them in a way that unlocks funding for what they care about. Now I've got something. Now it's part of the system. It's part of the structure. And so I took those models and I went from the Kellogg Company to the Coca-Cola Company. I went from Coca-Cola to Citigroup. I ran research at Ford Motor Company. I went to the Hershey Company. I'd bring 5-pound chocolate bars everywhere I'd go. And so none today. I no longer work there.
We missed those.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I brought 20 pounds out with me. So my only point on the marketing side of it is there is a lot of money in marketing, an enormous amount. It's horribly inefficiently spent. And so if it's inefficiently spent, it typically looks for a more efficient play in the marketplace. And it begs to find people who are amazing like you, who understand the marketplace. And so Good Exchange really came up around this idea, if we can simply connect that $2 trillion to the best of our ability with 7.5 billion people who care about something, and we can point them towards each other, and they decide to opt in, and there's a good exchange there. The brand gets their profitable growth, the person opts in and engages themselves to monetize for a cause they care about, and the brand receives what we call brand warmth. And that is the relational impact that every brand is looking for. No one wants a cold transaction anymore in a brand side. You can provide relational warmth in ways that nobody else can touch. So I just want to put the idea out for folks that you really are more in a position of power, because you connect with consumers in the billions all over the world, and you understand what motivates people to take action, and brands spend a whole bunch of money to try to deal with that. So that's a place where, if after the panel or what have you, we can talk about it, but Good Exchange was designed for that reason.
So let me just come in and understand this completely. So corporations have marketing budgets that are much larger than corporate social responsibility or sustainability budget.
Right.
And positioning the marketing dollars to work alongside NGOs to tap into their knowledge of local marketplaces enables the NGOs themselves then to tap into those marketing dollars and become a partner.
Yeah, that's
in that
exactly it. So in a specific example, we were launching a new product in the Philippines. And if you start with the idea, who else wins when you win? We started thinking like, well, who else could we elevate and support as a brand? This happened to be at the Hershey Company at the time. And so I happen to know Bill Drayton. I don't know if you ever ran into him or not. Big social enterprise guy. And so I thought, okay, no, Bill's got to have somebody in the Philippines. And he did. He had about 10,000, 15,000 stores. And I said to his group, I said, if I can just borrow your stores just for a little while, I need to do some product testing and pricing. I want to see if the signs are right, et cetera. And instead of me going to my ad agency or my media buy or my research organization, I'll just give the money to you. And he said, okay, well, that seems like a lot, because it's a lot more money, and it's a really tiny sort of micro engagement. So we've been doing these kinds of models for 30 years all over the world in a variety of ways, and it really is about the person taking the role of micro engagement, so watching an ad, downloading an app, walking into a store, doing a little bit of a research study. Whatever the brand normally has to spend money on, it's typically far, far less expensive if a community mobilizes around that same objective. And when they do it, it's real. It's not, sometimes a lot of this stuff comes in, you can spend it. I can spend $100 million on an ad campaign, and you may or may not see it. If I spend $100 million and I have people turn towards a brand purposefully and opt in, you may or may not buy it, but you have a different perspective about that brand after that money was transferred, and brand warmth ends up going up. So it's really about that kind of dynamic, and it's starting to pick up over the last 10 years now, I've seen. And now we're very heavily involved in even putting in smart contracts on blockchain, familiarity with blockchain. And so we're really looking at frontier technologies to drive and expedite this whole process and model.
JP, tell us a little bit more about individuals. This is, we've heard different perspectives on it now. Love to hear what individuals are doing, and particularly like living individuals and how they're donating.
Sure. Well, thanks. I actually, with Ed speaking a bit about marketing, I'll speak a little bit about marketing's cousin, sales, here for a second. Now, I think it's important to realize that 7% of all American charity goes overseas, and that collectively adds up to more than what the federal government grants to international aid. So this is a big area. The members of our organization are mostly focused domestically, but there's still, I'd probably guesstimate about 10% of our members giving that goes overseas. And so in approaching the high net worth individual or a funder, you want to line up, you want to allow somebody to give to your cause for the reason of their choice. And that's a really important maxim to understand in sales and lining up what you do with what they're interested in. Okay, don't position, you might have your own reason, your own syllogism as to why your cause is the most important cause. That doesn't mean that's what's most likely to motivate the funder. I'd encourage you to think creatively in terms of outcomes versus activities. And where a lot of savvy philanthropists are moving is they want to go beyond activities, sort of a report where you show up, throw up, and give a bunch of stats on people touched and that sort of thing. The question is what are the real life outcomes that you're driving at? I usually, if I had a board, I'd draw, if you have this is the line necessary to achieve activity that gives the perception that you're achieving something. Most NGOs hang out here because it's really safe and warm and fuzzy, and you can raise money and stay in business. But this might be the level of activity you need to reach to actually achieve the outcome that you're trying to. I would encourage you to set yourself apart as an organization focused on achieving this level of activity to get at the outcome. Okay, you set yourself apart and you place yourself in a really oriented towards holding yourself accountable for real outcomes. And if you fall short, folks will appreciate that you really pushed the envelope. And then think in the vein of thinking outside the box, I'll give you a couple examples from different sectors here that we have studied as an organization. There's an organization called Spirit of America. Okay, it's a private American philanthropy that saw there was a lot of frustration among special forces working overseas in trying to work with and put down counterinsurgencies. And a lot of what the special forces folks needed to gain trust with local populations just was getting gummed up through government bureaucracy. And so they basically began an end run to provide supplies directly to charitably provide real resources to folks working on the front lines in Iraq and Afghanistan that folks on the front lines could actually provide tools to help a local population start a new business, school supplies for a mom to help them educate their kids. Real life, life-changing resources. And that was just an outside the box. They didn't ask for permission, and now it's embraced by the Pentagon. There's another one here in the U.S. called the Deliver Fund, which is an organization that's mostly staffed with former special forces. And what they do is use a lot of their old know-how to track human traffickers here in the U.S. and break up pimp networks and serve up live leads to local law enforcement to really disrupt illegal human trafficking outfits here. Those are completely outside the box. They didn't wait and ask for permission. They didn't try to go like, how do you, maybe if we just tried to get this law changed or tried to lobby this legislature, they were actively trying to think outside the box and getting at outcomes. So those are just, a couple thoughts. I think one last item might be in approaching an individual funder, peer-to-peer introductions are really key. I always tell people nobody really wants to talk to me, but folks will talk to when an introduction can be made from one high net worth person to another in terms of a letter of introduction, being able to name drop 3 or 4 folks who we're working with. I could go on and on about that, but that's a really key way to gain credibility and have doors open with American funders, I suspect any funder overseas.
So JP has started in on my topic of how do we get connected to these funders? So how do we find them? Who are they? Where do we find, where do you resource them? So I'm going to ask my panelists, tell us a little bit about some of the resources that are out there that people should be thinking about using, particularly if you're in an NGO community or even a faith-based community. How do you start? What resources are out there where you can start? Network, beyond networking.
Do you want me to take this?
Sure,
one?
just start. You can start.
Sure. Well, I know there's a variety of resources in the foundation world, and I'll let others speak to that in terms of great research tools. I think when getting started in particularly around major gifts, the first couple contributions and first couple individuals who get involved is the hardest work. And I would encourage you to consider setting up an informal advisory board. We've set up different task forces at our organization with the purpose of engaging broader interest in the high net worth community. And the first task force of this sort for the purpose of development and encouraging philanthropic activity that we set up. I spent the first 9 months attracting the first member, and then we grew it to about 10 over the course of the following 6 months, because nobody wants to be the first one involved, and that takes the hardest amount of work. And so that's a lot of research and identifying online individuals who might be suspects who sync up with your values and interests. Map your own relationships. All of you are here representing NGOs. You probably have latent resources you haven't yet fully leveraged. Your boards, pastors or religious leaders that you're involved with. Find out all the board associations that they're on. Ask them. Research them. Find out the industries that they're in. Research those. Who are the top players in the industries that your board members and your own relationships are connected to? Basically, you're going to start mapping, if you're familiar with the game of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, you have, we're all connected in different ways to different people around the globe. And so mapping those relationships of those closest to you, board affiliations, charities that they give to, political candidates that they might give to, and their most significant givers. And then take those lists to the people that you most like or know, who you have the deepest relationship with. Sit down with them with that list of 50, 60, 100 people and say, who do you know on this list, and who can you introduce me to? Okay, that's a really great way to begin. You begin with those assets that you already all probably have, and that would be my first suggestion. There's a great research tool called Relationship Science, RelSci, I think .com, where you can basically, once you start capturing those, you can go a next step and map who those people know and the people who know them, and broaden it. So, but
I'm
I'll
gonna,
stop there.
I'm gonna jump to Natalie for some online resources, and I'm gonna come back to Chris, because I want to ask Chris, like, where are people finding you? So Natalie, what online resources should people be looking for and know about?
Sure. So I would say that the resources in the U.S. differ from resources in other countries. And so one thing I want to make sure I come back to is I'll start with the U.S. and then talk a little bit about the ability to leverage domestic philanthropy in other countries around the world, which is on the rise in most places and is a really critical partner. You don't always have to get U.S. funding for work around the world. And also, it's, in some places, it's becoming more difficult to access U.S. funding because of local laws. And so tapping into domestic philanthropy is increasingly important. So in the U.S., if you are looking for U.S. foundations, because of our tax system, foundations do have to publish through their tax forms who they fund. And so there are aggregators of that information where then you can see what foundations are funding, who their grantees are, et cetera. So one of the best known is called the Foundation Center. Very similar in name to the Council on Foundations, so people think I work there a lot. I don't. They're based in New York, and they have a great website that really allows you to see who's funding specific issues, specific countries, specific type of institutions. It's a really powerful tool. Another tool that can be very helpful for those looking to better understand the inner workings of foundations is a website called Inside Philanthropy, which gives you the inside scoop on philanthropy. They do analysis of different funders and their priorities. They also have a section of their website that you can subscribe to find out information about who works at different foundations and where those program officers have come from and those relationships to help you do the relationship mapping. I would totally agree with many of the things that JP said around needing introductions from other funders is much more powerful than introductions from someone like myself or from another grantee. And the more connections you have, the easier it is to access them. As you look outside the United States, one of the things I would suggest is that there are networks like the Council. In many countries around the world, there's this growing ecosystem to support foundations, whether it's the Association of Family and Corporate Foundations in Colombia or Philanthropia Indonesia. Around the world, there are many national philanthropy institutions like the Pakistan Center for Philanthropy that can help you map and understand foundations in that country and the work that they're doing and the issues that they're working on. And so those can be really important partners. They may have national annual conferences that bring together foundations, things like that. So the growth of domestic philanthropy in other parts of the world, I think, is critical for civil society sustainability. There's a lot of ways to tap into that in the work that you do.
Fantastic. So I promised that we would do a quick Twitter update here. If you are following me, and my name is Jim at State, so it's JIMATSTATE, Jim at State. We're going to do a quick Twitter poll, figure out what resources have you utilized to learn more about what foundations are funding. So I'm going to throw this up there. It'll be up there for about 5 minutes or so. You're welcome to tweet in and check in on the poll and see what people are doing. So feel free to get this out and put it in your hand and talk to us. Chris, where are foundations, or where are people finding you? How do they find you, particularly in Nassau?
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid TRT is making it rather difficult because we've only been operational for about 5 years, so we don't have a website. So if you've been looking for that, or you go to look for that, you won't find one yet. What you'll find if you Googled our name is you'll find us connected to things that we're funding, funders who or grants that cite us on their web pages or things of that sort. So we're a little bit elusive at the moment, not on purpose. We're working on that. But I think obviously websites. We have two siblings. They have operational websites, and we have the same fundamental mandates, but we have different strategic priorities. But generally, I mean, institutional funders are really quite eager to fund things. And I think to square, something that JP was saying quite explicitly and was mentioned, I think, by Martin too, about looking for win-wins. I mean, funders are, they're very focused on their mission and their purpose. They're interested in the downstream effects. And so having a convincing story about why these activities and these deliverables are going to produce these downstream effects That's what institutional funders in particular are interested in, because they're stewards of a mission. They're not like individual donors. They don't have that kind of flexibility, and so you do them a big favor if you are aligning with their fundamental mission and mindset, as I was saying earlier. And then they'll find you. They'll be coming after you. So I think the other thing, sort of practical suggestion, is that institutional funders tend to haunt events, not just like this, which is by invitation, but conferences and meetings. So you can often they often will send officers there, because a lot of what we do, because TRT, for example, we don't do open submission. So the John Templeton Foundation, our sibling in the United States, they will throw open their application portal once or twice a year, and anybody can submit an inquiry about anything. We don't do that. All of our grant making is relational. So it's all done via outreach and relationships, and it's very time consuming, but it's all about talking to people, and which is fun for us, because the whole name of the game is to align people's passions and what they're doing with what your mission is. You're looking for that alignment all the time. And so the more you can help us to see that alignment, the better. It's not just about what you do, but understanding, what it is that we care about, and then helping us to see that alignment, because we're accountable for advancing that.
And that really is a great segue, because I'm curious, how do you spoke a little bit about the foundations are going out and they're looking for organizations to fund, but how do you convince a foundation to be open? I mean, many foundations have a set of programs that they're running, maybe a long set of programs or a set of priorities that they're in. How do you introduce something like religious freedom into that topic set? And I'm going to start with Natalie just quickly, if you would.
Yeah, I think, JP was talking about this earlier. It is about speaking the language to the foundation. So thinking about how your work relates to the way that they talk about their work and that they frame it, so that when a foundation reads that, they see that connection. They don't have to come up with that themselves. And so if they care about pluralism, and that's really the core of what they do, your communication with them, your application to them, your engagement with them should be how your work relates to pluralism. And so I think that's one of the easiest ways to start the conversation, is to do the work on your side of making the case for how what you're doing, even if it's about hunger or another issue, is linked to their core mission and beliefs. So I gave the example earlier of the Ford Foundation. Everything that they fund is linked to inequality right now. That doesn't mean that they only fund programs looking at a certain type of inequality, or that everything that every program they fund is focused on inequality. It means that inequality is a part of the work of everything that they do. And so how can you frame your work in inequality? How is that a part of what you're doing, even if you're working on something like religious freedom, for example? And I think that's how you can start to find funders that don't just fund specifically what you do. I think the other thing I would say is I was at a foundation that was very limited in geographic scope. And if someone tried to convince us to go somewhere else, that was not going to go anywhere. We were not going to go anywhere else. Those geographies were very set. So I wouldn't encourage you to try to convince foundations to change their strategy. That's a very long game, if you will. Instead, I would really focus on how do you take the work that you're doing, identify the subset of foundations where there's already some alignment with what you're doing. So you've done the legwork of finding out who's working in the geographies you care about, who has some connection to your work, and then frame that work in their language, and show that you understand their mission, the way that they look at the work that they do, and that you're very much a part of that mission.
Real quick from a corporate standpoint, I almost wouldn't bring up religious. I mean, you got to put it in context just to the whole panel. Talk about diversity, inclusion, poverty. I bet you if we spent 5 minutes, we could reverse engineer whatever you're doing inside something they already fund. So just kind of highlighting that, because the fear around the corporate side in this particular space is that if I do something a little bit off on this side, I am going to get absolutely hammered on this other side. But when it comes to the sort of universal values, respect, compassion, kindness, that's what we talk about, what we should be doing every single day. So it's really highlighting what my the panel up here is saying. It really has to be a solve for this particular issue as it relates to their language. The other part of it, there's a big problem on the corporate side right now, and that is a lot of trillion-dollar type money and funds is looking to see how well corporations are doing in spaces that you guys work in. So they're like, hey, okay, how well are you doing in mitigating downside risk in markets? How well are you doing? All these areas that now their share price are attached to it. So effectively look at it from being a solve to these companies. What about the 500 companies that sign a diversity pledge from inclusion and diversity? Okay, well, now what are they doing? So be the solution to what because they have to report back in terms of what they're doing. So it's really coming at it in a little bit of a different way. You're a solve to their issue versus, hey, please, can you fund me because it's amazing work and we should all do this together. So that's the only other part I wanted to say, using their language and then really being a solve and looking at yourself as an asset or a significant treasure they haven't discovered yet effectively.
JP, I'm going to move to you quickly, but I just want to let everyone know you're now trending on Twitter. So the rest of the world is hearing about this religious freedom conversation that we're having. And JP, I will also note in the Twitter poll, personal networks was the one that people felt most akin to, and what resources are they currently utilizing. But the I-990s, which are an important document, I see several nodding heads in the room, those are also important too. So if you're not familiar with the I-990, I suggest you start to look at those.
Sure. So an area in thinking about this question with individual wealth creators, individual business leaders, I think I'd encourage you to think of possible philanthropists as partners and not just funders, right? And I can't tell you how many times I have been, as a grant recipient, thinking that I've figured something out and I've got this great idea and let me present this to you, Mr. Philanthropist, and then realize that they had a much better idea of how to go about it. I think about, there's an example of an organization here in town that had a talk where they had one of their policy experts explain the financial crisis, and in the audience was one of the country's largest investment bankers. And afterwards he got off, he said, you'd learn a lot if you just asked me a few questions. And a lot of times we forget that the folks that we're approaching are experts in and of themselves. They're some of the most highly successful individuals on the planet, and we should be looking at them as a major intellectual resource to improve our business models, improve how we might go about approaching how to solve these big problems. When we do that, we also have the added benefit of we're better able to sync up what we're doing with what they're interested in. Because when you become involved in helping, if a funder becomes involved in helping you fix or improve your own model or your own intervention, they're far more likely to open up their checkbook and get involved as well. And that is not you don't do one to get the other, but you do one and you also get the other, if that makes sense. So that's one of the biggest lessons I hope you take away from this.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the audience to start thinking of some really good Stump the Panel questions. We want to hear from you. I've heard from a few of you on Twitter. I understand there's an elephant in the room that needs to be asked, and then there are some questions around I-90s. So we're going to talk about those too. Thoughts from Chris? Yes.
One piece of advice you might not hear, it might sound normally here, but might sound a little counterproductive. But I think is involved in getting kind of the donor's mindset, trying to see things from the point of view of the donor. Donors are looking for synergies, particularly if they fund a lot of things in an area, such as TRT. So we might have 15 to 20 discrete projects that we're funding, and we're trying to create a kind of concerted effect. So it's very helpful if you know the space of what other people are doing, and you have an understanding of how what you're doing complements what other people are doing, and being able to talk informedly about what other people are doing. It sounds a little like like that film Miracle on 34th Street, where the Santa Claus at the Kohl's department store is sending parents to other stores where they could find the things that they're looking for at a lower price or something they can't find at that store. So it sounds like sending the donor to the competition, but that's not the way the donors see it. That's just not their perspective. So I think one of the things that large-scale donors like TRT do is we're connecting dots. So we're looking to see how we fund things, a variety of things that are connected to one another. So I think understanding those connections yourself between what you're doing and what 12 other people who are doing something related, it's not exactly the same but similar. That's it's very helpful because it begins again to get inside the mindset of the funder.
So with great trepidation, I ask, are there any burning questions out there that we can ask the panelists? Many of you have microphones in front of you. If you're sitting in a seat that doesn't have a microphone, just approach one that does, please. Tell us who you are, and please do have a question.
Milica Pešić, Media Diversity Institute, London. I've already tweeted the questions, but obviously I didn't get your tweet address properly, Jim. I've been in this field for 20 years, and for me it's still a puzzle, the lack of time commitment of particularly foundations to certain issues. Usually we get grants for 1-2 years. Then we have to change the name of the project to actually cheat in aim to get you to. So what, do you really believe that in religion or in the media field, that's where we operate, you can achieve something really in a year or two? That's my question. Thank you.
Panelists.
No, we don't believe that. But we actually have restrictions, expenditure restrictions on us. All the three Templetons have the same restrictions and about renewal and follow-up if you're going to continue the same activity. But I think the reason for that is that Sir John wanted us to be catalysts and to attract other donors. So part of the activity that we engage in as part of our strategy is trying to understand what other funders are doing. Talk about peer-to-peer. So particularly not only institutional donors, but individual donors because of this restriction that we have. So we are interested in doing things, over the long term, but we can't, because of our guidelines, we can't sustain them at a high level of funding above 50%. So we have to get down below 50%, within 3 to 5 years. But so we're always looking for funders to partner with so that we can do that. So that's something else you can actually help, particularly organizations like Templeton and others that have the same kinds of issues by knowing and helping them to understand who are the other funders in this space, because they can then make contacts with them, and it increases the connectivity between donors. But it is something we have to live with just because that's what our guidelines are.
Question here?
Well, a comment. Since you are talking about pluralism, a lot of people are still confused about it. I'm Mike Gauss with the Center for Pluralism. Just want to define pluralism in the most simplistic way. It is respecting the otherness of others and accepting the genetic or God-given uniqueness to each one of us. When we do that, conflicts fade and solutions emerge. Everything you were talking about pluralism, you can find those combination of words on our website, Center for Pluralism. I was so excited to hear the talk about pluralism that I have been working for the last 30 years.
Thank you for defining that for us. That's very helpful. A question in the back.
Yes, my name is Don Sweeting, president of Colorado Christian University. It's wonderful to hear about all the resources, but my experience has been that, especially with corporate foundations and large private foundations, that they have a bias against traditional religion because you are religious. That can be a big turnoff because you are a particular denomination or something. Even if you have a project with universal values, or because you represent a traditional sexual morality, that it's a non-starter. So can you address the bias against traditional religion and how to overcome that, or how to work together? Because I'm assuming many people here come from traditional religions where they have these views. So we don't know how to go forward.
I can give you some ideas here, but you know, I've worked with funders on projects focused on, for instance, increasing religious observance in the United States. Okay, and that interest, you would think initially, would be really uniquely focused on the few, on folks who are religious, for instance. We were able to actually build a coalition of religious and non-religious, Catholic Evangelical, LDS, Jewish funders interested in it as an outcome, because there's just a tremendous amount of social science that is growing. Dr. Tyler Vanderweel from Harvard has some of the best stuff on public health outcomes associated with religion. And we were able to build a coalition of folks on lower ordered common cause arguments that allowed us to pull together a group very much diverse in their theological perspectives, but understanding that regular worship is a key social and public good. Okay, so that's an example of something that of a way one can think about it. Now, what is your good that you're trying to achieve? I'm not saying that you change the good that you're trying to achieve in order to seek and build a coalition of funders. What you would do is what are some of the outcomes that are unique to your mission, okay? And certainly, you know, my first name's John Paul. I have 7 kids. You can probably guess my faith background, but I don't need to lead with a doctrinal argument from a Catholic perspective to gain interest in a particular project. The question is what are some of the byproducts of what I'm doing and what I'm interested in, what I'm working on? How does some of those byproducts, for some of the panelists have mentioned, Natalie and Ed and others, that economic mobility, less poverty, more tolerance, a variety of different public goods that different funders may have common interest in. You could present your own project, what you are working on, so long as it does actually do those things. You can do it in a way that doesn't lead with what I would argue from my perspective would be theologically higher ordered arguments as to why and what motivates maybe a person's interest and your organization's first interest in it.
Ed, did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I do, because honestly, from the corporate standpoint, it's probably the hardest. And it's still hard. And I go back, I'll sort of look at that point from a perspective of what language are they using. So when we say pluralism, what are companies using in terms of love one another, golden rule, however they want to say, well, maybe it's diversity and inclusion. Like, you should just at least be able to work together in a way that you move forward to find some mutual value or benefit. And so in those kinds of cases, it's almost better to find a particular issue. And I did this a lot, actually, over the years. I worked a lot with PEPFAR and HIV and things like that. I'd bring really strong evangelicals with folks who hated people of faith, but you found that one small little area, and they recognized they needed each other. One was one of the leading AIDS activists in the world. He got arrested 300 times, was just a really amazing character. But they needed each other in order to move the agenda forward on something. But it was around that specific issue. It was around HIV. It wasn't around, let's come together to figure out where we theologically agree. But along the way, along the road, they ended up getting to know each other as human beings, as people. Did they agree on everything at the very end? No. But did they agree on a lot more than they thought they would agree on? Yes, because they weren't then two-dimensional cartoon characters to each other, right? So in some ways, on the corporate side, you always really have to, I mean, unless you really have maybe overtly faith-based corporate, Chick-fil-A or someone, like, okay, got it, you can go ahead and do that. But generally speaking, on the corporate side, it's really got to be issues-based. It's really got to be around things like diversity and inclusion. It's got to be something around, okay, within your faith community, are you looking to lift education? Because we fund a whole bunch of education. And do we necessarily have to do that unilaterally, or can we work with the cross-sector to do that? So it's about the education side, where you're bringing that piece in order to lift the common objective. Otherwise, I'm afraid still even today, when you talk about religious freedom, if you're not talking about it in context to diversity and inclusion, in some ways, it's still not quite there. But there are ways to get around it in some capacities.
So we have a few more questions, and the good news is hopefully our panelists will be sticking around after this, but we've got a little bit of time for questions. I know I had a question here and then a question in the back. Yes.
I'm Dr. Nguyen Đình Thong. I'm with Boat People SOS, and we are fortunate enough to have a fund development team in-house, and yet we're still struggling to really second guess or research on the funding agencies or sources. I think that many of the grassroots organizations would be almost impossible for them to spend that much time and resources because they want to focus their core competencies. And you guys expect us to collaborate with each other, right? To build synergy. And if this is truly a commitment of partnership for a common cause, the challenge from us would be that how about the funding sources coming together, working together, forming, say, a team of coaches to look over all the multiple submissions and decide among yourselves that these submissions should come together, and you will help to form a package that will include many players in there. And then you decide on how the funders, the funding agency, can work together to support a comprehensive, long-term project that will make a difference. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone with thoughts on this topic?
I think it's a really great point. It's really, I mean, even as an example, when I was on the corporate side, spent most of my life on that side, and so spent a lot of time in the Chamber of Commerce Foundation and things like that, and that's where I ran into the Global Partnerships at State, which basically looks at blended capital, different partners, and say, look, you have that part, you've got this part, you've got that part, how about we collect our resources together, direct it in a way that has a much better chance for long-term sustainable impact. So I'm exactly with you, especially on the side that you're on now. You're probably spending, 24 hours a day doing the very thing that you're effectively doing, and don't have a lot of time to do the other. The one other point I will make, though, that there's a limited giving bucket at the end of the day, and that's why I was so excited. I actually ended up staying in the corporate side because that's where all the main money is at. So I started to look at being solutions. I don't know what marketplace you're in. I don't know what communities. I don't know who currently supports you, who's on your board, what group it's attached to, but going to the relationship side, my guess is that's a value to some company that's trying to enter that market that has a radically different vantage point in terms of how they want to engage you versus maybe how you've engaged funders before. And that's a much more sustainable, long-term, systems-based, teamwork sort of aspect versus gift and giver sort of thing. Not that that's not a good thing or bad thing, but it's just, in general, it should be looked at in some ways, at least on the corporate side, as a systems play. How are you enabling their growth in the marketplace that also elevates their employees who work there and things of that nature? So yes, bundling is a really smart idea. I think Partnerships at State does an outstanding job at it, and groups that they put together like that. And we kind of come all from a little bit of a different sector space, even on this panel here.
Ed, thank you for that plug for my office. We are all about public-private partnerships and working with civil society organizations, corporates, foundations, bringing them together, so I really do appreciate that. I posted one more poll because I'm curious to hear what you all are learning. So if you're on Twitter still, you want to tweet at us. I see lots of hands. We have time for maybe 2 questions, and then the panel will stick around. And I know this gentleman has been waiting, so I'm going to start with you.
Hi. Thank you very much. My name is Syed Taibul Bashar. I'm the founder chairman of Savings Foundation. It's in Bangladesh. We are based in Bangladesh. So basically, I have 2 questions. I'll make it short. The first question actually is we actually hosted an inter-religious event in the capital of our country last month, to be honest, and we were blessed to have the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations Office of Genocide and Prevention to be a part of it. Also, the local UNDP Bangladesh was present at the event as well. So the event was actually, we have done it with all the religious leaders in Bangladesh, and we brought them in an hotel for 2 days, and we had a lot of discussion of action plan of wow and what could be done. So my question regarding it is basically, we have seen that especially in the international region and in our country and even in the Southeast Asia region, that the local culture and heritage plays a big role in how things are being done. So when it comes to our country as well, we are rich with Bengali culture, and the culture and heritage is very high. And whenever we speak about religion, it is seen that the culture and heritage is actually plays a big role in having the harmony and having everything together. So when we approach a different grants commission or an international organization, when the focus is on intra-religion freedom, we tend to highlight a lot on the culture and the heritage side as well. And sometimes we get to see that maybe it is not something they're looking for, but it is to us, it's very important for the bigger picture of having the religious freedom and in that coming up. So I would like to have your say on that as well. And the last question I would have is regarding the corporate sector as well. We, being the Save and Serve Foundation, is actually the largest young youth civil society forum, and we have a large number of youth civil society forum working with us from the corporate sector as well, to a lot of from the civic sector, from the legal department sector as well. And we try and keep it strict to 35 years age so that we get the youth promotion coming up. So we have some events happening regarding the youth development and women rights, gender equality and women rights in the Southeast Asia region. And we're also focusing a bit on corporate, and what we have seen from the ground level, we have some programs taking place in the villages area that the people not being so knowingly not knowing much about how the corporate world can actually come into this sector without the CSR, and how they could come and help in this sector of the education and the civic education with the religious education as well. Because the problem which lies, once we have gone to the ground, we have seen that they think the corporates are trying to penetrate the market rather than giving something. So when it comes to Asia and Southeast Asia, how do you feel that you should come in, and what kind of materials you would require to come in the market as well to support the local foundation? Thank you very much.
Any of my panelists?
It's just real quick on the corporate side. One of the things that we're working on very heavily now with the Fifth Element Group, which, as I mentioned, this public holding company for frontier technologies to support sustainable development goals. We launched it at the UN on something called decadeofwomen.org. You can look at it for gender equity and gender equality. So in some ways, we're looking at these frontier technologies and these digital assets, and you can call it cryptocurrencies, but cryptocurrencies that are built on a blockchain that are built into it. How do you plug economies and people into a system where they're part of the supply chain already? So it's not necessarily something where it's a one-off grant or anything else. It's basically funding for social enterprise in those marketplaces where now they're part of the same ecosystem and supply chain, and there's complete visibility and transparency all the way through. So it allows that person, so that you can't remove their transactions because it's on blockchain. You can't. If you look at it from that perspective, there's a lot of capital going in on the social venture side. So within your marketplace, in terms of doing local business and social venture business, that's one way to really heavily engage corporate side, because oftentimes there's source markets as well. So one thought.
So we're coming to a closer, but Chris has been taking copious notes. So I want to start with Chris. Let's bring it into a close here. Tell us sort of final thoughts that you might have, and the notes that you've been taking. What have you heard? What are you interested in? Final thoughts for the audience.
Well, thanks. I mean, maybe just to square the last question too. I mean, one of the challenges of being a global funder, as we are, is what you were describing there, which is why I said in my opening remarks, my comments about being local, and understanding how ideals and how the things that we care about find their expression locally within cultures that might not be familiar to us. So it is just, you're right, it's a significant challenge. And, you know, we're not a funder that has a center of gravity within a particular faith tradition. So we're by our nature sort of multi-faith. So perhaps it's somewhat easier for us to do that than perhaps for other funders. But I think that's, and I guess maybe to square, you know, a couple of comments that were made earlier, I think in some of the things that Natalie was saying at the beginning, and that is, the issues that we're talking about here are extremely complex. They have many different facets, and different advocacy groups are grabbing a different sort of part of it, and funders are grabbing another part of it. And so part of the challenge for us as funders is figuring out how we partner with an organization like Ford, for example, to give one example. I mean, we think that's quite possible for a religion trust to partner with an organization like Ford because, hey, we're really talking about the same thing. We want the same thing. And so finding that as part of the challenge, I think, of advancing what this ministerial is about is understanding that the problems and the challenges are complicated, and there are a lot of diverse contributions that need to be made to it. So seems to me.
Great. Thank you, Chris. JP?
Yeah, I would, going back to a point earlier on outcomes versus activity, I would encourage you to think boldly in terms of outcomes. And what that might mean, and speaking to the gentleman's question actually near the front, is if you really are focused on outcomes, it may cause you to square with there's strategic gaps in your organization. To get at an outcome doesn't mean that you can do everything possible to achieve that outcome, which actually some of the most, I think, some really effective organizations in the U.S. Outside of this sector do a good job of developing cross-organizational strategies and approaching funders collaboratively so that it's not just one organization with, you know, their plan to save the world or the universe or what have you. It's several organizations with a comprehensive plan that can go about doing it. So think bold in terms of outcomes, come up with strategies that can achieve those outcomes, be humble enough to recognize your own organization's deficiencies in achieving those, and then seek partnerships with NGOs who can fill those gaps and consider a multi-organizational approach to a funder.
Great advice. Thank you, JP. Ed?
So I would say probably two things to think about on the corporate side. One of which is that each of you are connected to an extraordinary group, community, network that companies need. And they spend a lot of money trying to engage. So if you begin to look at how can you help companies make more money, sounds ridiculous. How can you make companies more money and be a solve for that? Maybe you've got a population someplace in Thailand and it's boys between the ages of 14 and 28 and Nike needs to sell shoes. Whatever it is, it's that good exchange. It's a radically different view of going into a corporate with that kind of conversation. There may be nothing there, but they'll appreciate it. And they'll start looking at it and say, okay, well, you're trying to look at this as an omni-win where everybody's going to be elevated at the same time. That's a kind of partner that I really want. The other one I would say, and it was mentioned a few times on the panel, is really, it's ideal if you can put it into the language of how corporates talk. And so if it is diversity and inclusion, if it is sustainable development goals, many more companies now are signing up to sustainable development goals of UN and figuring out where religious freedom fits within those goals, a lot of them. Same thing with gender equity. When we launched the Gender Equity Initiative, SDG number 5, we know that as women get more parity in marketplaces, everything's better. So that became one of those that lifts all SDGs. Religious freedom it feels to me like one of those. So if a company's dealing with hunger and water and peace and poverty, whatever they're working on, my bet is that we could probably put together religious freedom as an enabler of that, so it's much more likely to have them engage as well. So I would just leave you with, you have an incredible power that companies really need you, and it's just trying to figure out a little bit of a Match.com or a Good Exchange kind of way to put it together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ed.
And what I would just add to tie it up is I think throughout we talked a little bit about the non-financial benefits of working with philanthropy. I want to close to just challenge you to think even more about those. Whether a foundation can be a great partner as a convener so they can actually help bring together their grantees, you with others, to talk about these big issues. We had many examples of foundations as thought partners and philanthropists looking at their technical depth of expertise and how that can be informative to your work as a matchmaker, helping identify other funders that you might work with or other grantees that you might partner with. So how do you really approach your philanthropic partners as more than just a check writer? I think that strengthens the relationship. It encourages the ongoing engagement with that partner. And so how can you really think creatively? And there's a guide, I don't know if there's a way to share on Twitter perhaps, a resource done by HUD, the Housing and Urban Development here, that looked at a long period of time of these philanthropic partnerships and public-private partnerships and the roles that philanthropy can play. And I think seeing those examples and then thinking how you leverage foundations and other philanthropic partners in those non-financial ways is a great way to really strengthen your engagement going forward.
Fantastic. Well, I know there's lots more questions, and the good news is that we're headed to a break, and the panelists are going to stick around, so you're going to have an opportunity to talk with them directly. I'd like to thank the panelists for this amazing discussion around philanthropy and corporates, so thank you guys. And thank you all of you for participating and participating online as well. I look forward to talking to you in the break. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will resume shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence your mobile devices. Our program will resume shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as the program will resume shortly. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats at this time. The program is about to begin. Thank you. Please take your seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Special Advisor for Religious Minorities in the Office of International Religious Freedom, Knox Thames.
Good morning, everyone. Encourage everyone to find your seat, and we'll get started with our next set of survivors we'll hear from today. We're very honored to have two real heroes, people who have been working on the front lines for religious freedom. The first person you'll hear from this morning is Peter Bhatti. He's the chair of International Christian Voice, a nonprofit based in Canada, focused on promoting international religious freedom and particularly religious minorities in Pakistan. Peter will be discussing the legacy of his brother Shahbaz Bhatti. Shahbaz was a friend of mine and a friend of many people in this room. He was a prominent Pakistani Christian who was tragically murdered by the Pakistani Taliban outside his mother's home in Islamabad in March 2011. Shahbaz was the first federal minister for minorities in the Pakistani government, and he was the only Christian in the cabinet as well. He was an outspoken critic of Pakistan's notorious blasphemy law and had been advocating for Asia Bibi, one of the highest profile blasphemy prisoners of conscience in the world. But throughout his life, he played a leading role in raising the plight of religious minorities in Pakistan, Christians, Hindus, Ahmadis, and others. Our next hero you'll hear from after Peter is Razia Sultana, a Rohingya lawyer. She practices law in the Chittagong courts in Bangladesh. She holds a BA and LLB from Bangladesh and receives human rights and humanitarian law training from universities in Canada. Born in Rakhine State in Burma, she's the founder of the Rohingya Women Welfare Network, a Bangladesh-based NGO, and she's also a senior researcher at Kaladan Press. Based on her excellent work, her interviews with survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, in 2017, she authored a groundbreaking report entitled, "No Need to Cover Our Faces, the Rohingya Rape Victims of the Burmese Military." She's also addressed the UN Security Council in April 2018 about the abuses in Burma. So first, I'd like to ask Peter Bhatti to the podium to talk about his brother Shahbaz.
Good morning. On behalf of Martyr Shabaz Bhatti's family and the Pakistani community, I would like to thank Ambassador Brown and Secretary Mr. Pompeo and U.S. Department for arranging the first ever ministerial to advance religious freedom and giving me opportunity to share the story of my brother who gave his life to defense of human rights and religious freedom. Through this event, representatives of international organizations and civil society are able to shed the light and hope into the lives of those people who are suffering due to religious persecution. Defending a human right and religious freedom and standing with the victims of religious persecution is not an easy task. Some defenders may pay the heavy price of life. My brother Clement Shabaz Bhatti, Federal Minister of Minorities Affairs of Pakistan, paid the price of his life fighting for the rights of religious minorities in Pakistan. He was 13 years old. It was Good Friday before Easter when he heard the homily that how our Lord Jesus Christ sacrificed his life for the mankind and gave us redemption and salvation in this world. That was the moment when Shabaz Bhatti responded that his calling and made the commitment to give his life to liberate the oppressed, victimized, and downtrodden religious minorities of Pakistan. Religious freedom was an issue which was very close to my brother's heart. He spent more than 30 years toward this cause. When he was schoolboy, he started his struggle to use the voice to protect who are persecuted for their faith. Shabaz was patriotic and loyal son of Pakistan. He wanted to see Pakistan as a progressive state. He wanted to see equality for all citizens of Pakistan despite of caste, color, and creed. His strong advocacy and bold initiative against extremism led his appointment as Pakistan Federal Minister of Minorities Affairs. After taking an oath as a minister, he stated that I took this position only to continue to serve the suffering, victimized, and persecuted communities. On his public statement, he said, which was his last statement, forces of violence, darkness, and militant band organizations and pro-Al-Qaeda want to impose their radical philosophy in Pakistan, and whoever stand against their philosophy, they threaten them. And when I am leading this campaign against Sharia law and abolishment of other discriminatory laws and speaking for the oppressed and marginalized minorities, these Taliban threaten me. But I want to share that I believe on Jesus Christ, who has given his own life for us. I know what is the meaning of cross, and I am following the cross. So this warning cannot change my dedication and principle. I am living for justice of my community and die to defend their rights. We believe that United States of America is one of the greatest leaders in the world and the champion of human rights. The U.S. has history for intervening wherever human rights, religious freedom, and democracy was falling short. In the light of current situation, I would like to following recommendation to improve the situation of religious minorities in Pakistan. NGOs and other institutions who are working in Pakistan to promote human rights and religious freedom need to be strengthened by international community. More funds need to be used in the field of education, health, interfaith harmony, and in economic development. These funds need to be distributed with the consultation of local and international human rights organizations who are working tirelessly for the betterment of the vulnerable communities. All international organizations and U.S. State Department expressed their deep concern with the government of Pakistan about discriminatory laws, especially misuse of blasphemy laws and the forceful conversion cases, and asked for immediate release of all prisoners who are falsely accused under the blasphemy law, including Asia Bibi. We also urge to United States, NGOs, and civil society to open their doors for victims, Pakistani refugees, who today are suffering from miserable life in the country like Thailand and Malaysia. These refugees fled from extreme persecution they faced in their homeland and now stuck in their country and need our help. We must not leave them alone. The religious minorities of Pakistan, despite of discrimination, victimization, and persecution, and uncounted attacks, remain loyal and patriotic citizens of Pakistan. They are proud to be Pakistani and ready to sacrifice their life for their country. At the end, I will conclude with this commitment. The extremists in Pakistan may silence the bold voice of Shahbaz Bhatti, but we as a family will continue our struggle to bring the change in Pakistan as per vision of our founding father, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Shahbaz Bhatti's sacrifice will not go in vain, no matter how much more we may have to pay the price. Thank you and God bless.
Good morning. I'm Razia Sultana, origin Rohingya. I came here to share the inside situation of Rakhine State. What his real name is Arakan. I'm a Rohingya lawyer and researcher. Since 2016, I have been interviewing Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. I have documented hundreds of rape cases committed by Myanmar army troops during their brutal clearance operation in August last year, in which hundreds of Rohingya villages were burned down and thousands of men, women, and children killed. My evidence shows that rape was used as a weapon against the Rohingya as part of deliberate strategy to destroy and drive them out of Myanmar. State persecution of Rohingya has been going on for decades. They have been denied their identity and citizenship, their right to education, to travel, to marry, and choose the number of their children. And of course, they have also suffered religious persecution, particularly since widespread anti-Islamic riots in 2012, when the Myanmar authorities shut down mosques and madrasa throughout northern Rakhine State. Religious festival could not be celebrated, and fear-mongering about the Islamic terrorist threat led to widespread arrest and torture of Rohingya civilians, including imams. The Myanmar military operation in northern Rakhine last August specifically targeted Muslim communities, while entire Rohingya villages, including mosques and madrasa, were burned down. Nearby Buddhist villages were left untouched. Myanmar troops used the Buddhist temple as military camp and launched attacks from them. But Muslims are not only religious minority being persecuted and attacked by the Myanmar military. During the ongoing war against the Kachin in northern Burma, Christian churches have been bombed and destroyed, and Buddhist pagodas set up in their place. The Myanmar military are aggressively promoting themselves as defenders of Buddhism. They and the state propaganda machine are encouraging the spread of extreme Buddhist nationalism. Young children in Dhamma school set up by the extreme Buddhist group Mahabharata across the country are being taught to hate and fear Islam. But the Myanmar military have no sincere interest to Buddhist provision. Buddhist nationalism is just a mean to really support among the majority Burman for their continued hold on power and ongoing war against ethnic minorities. The Myanmar army also persecuted Buddhists who stand against them. They have carried out scorched earth campaign in Shan state, displacing hundreds of thousands of Shan Buddhists, desecrating Buddhist temple, and killing and torturing Buddhist monks. The Myanmar government claimed that the violence in Rakhine State is the result of long-standing communal problem between Muslim and Buddhist. But this is not true. The root cause of the violence against the Rohingya and other ethnic peoples in the Myanmar military ongoing policy to forcibly occupy and control the ethnic territories and benefit from their rich natural resources. The Myanmar military is deliberately fueling religious conflict as part of our divide and rule strategy. The world must not be fooled by the so-called democratic transition in Myanmar and by the so-called peace process. The army remains all-powerful in Myanmar, and behind the shield of the elected government led by Aung San Suu Kyi is continuing to wage war and committed atrocities against ethnic people throughout the country with impunity. International pressures is urgently needed to end this military impunity and support genuine political reform that can end the oppression and religious persecution of all ethnic people in Myanmar, including the Rohingya. I request your support in calling for the UN Security Council to urgently refer the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. I also urge the United States administration to expand existing sanctions on Myanmar to include high-level military officers up to and including the commander of Chief Mi Aung Hlaing. I urge the Congress to pass the Burma sanction bills and Senator Macklin to bring the S-2016 bill to a vote in the full Senate. Finally, there must be no repatriation of Rohingya refugees to Myanmar unless they are granted full citizenship and can return to their original home under the protection of international security forces. Thank you.
These people are why we're here today. These people are the people we're trying to help. The communities they represent are the communities we're all trying to help. So I'd ask that we all give a standing ovation to these two brave people.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the host of Voice of America's Plugged In, Greta Van Susteren.
Boy, they do they? All right, now you can hear me. And I'm still happy to be here. In spite of that, I'm still happy in my rather unusual start. Ambassador Brownback, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to see you. He and I go way back to his days on Capitol Hill, and it's always a pleasure to see him and all the other distinguished guests. But even more fun today, I get to introduce two of the panelists. Mark Burnett is here, and of course, Mark has produced basically every show you've ever seen on TV and every show you're watching now. Mark, you want to join us? And Johnny Moore is with us as well. Johnny has been, we had breakfast together, Mark and Johnny, and my husband and I had breakfast together, and Johnny's had some fascinating stories about where he's been traveling in Iraq and the whole issue of religious freedom, which of course is what draws all of us today. I thought that we would, since Mark has got this incredible movie that they've done, I thought we'd start with a short clip from the movie, which I think really sort of sets the stage for this discussion. And to explain it, though, I'm going to turn to Mark. Mark, what are we about to see? He knew how to press a button. Did you see that? He does real TV.
Because I'm a producer, not the star. And the producer has to make sure people can hear what the stars are saying. So, you know, as a producer, I've made a lot of television over the years, and including, for those of you Americans here, and maybe around the world, The Voice on Mondays and Tuesdays, #1 on Monday, #1 Tuesday, Survivor, #1 on Wednesdays for 18 years, Jamie Foxx, Beat Shazam, Kevin Hart's show, Shark Tank. You know, on top of that, you know, Handmaid's Tale, which is our show, and many, many other shows. And we also, in 2013, made a series called The Bible. And many people in Hollywood said to my wife, Roma Downey, who was the star of Touched by an Angel, and myself, okay, you guys have really lost your minds. No one in America on primetime television is going to care about the Bible on television. That's ridiculous. Finally, you guys are going to have a big failure on your hands. Well, the Bible went on television. It was up against the Bible on one channel, against Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead. And the Bible beat the combined audiences of Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead. In fact, the Bible in this country received 100 million viewers. We then put the Bible on in Canada with a week's notice, and unfortunately, the Canadians placed the Bible up against the first game of the National Hockey League.
Which we discussed at breakfast is one of the religions in Canada.
Yes, that's right.
The state religion.
And supernaturally, the Bible, in fact, beat the National Hockey League in Canada. This led on to relationships throughout the United States and, in fact, the world with religious leaders across all faiths. And those relationships became, in the strangest way, important in that we were invited in September 2013 by His Majesty King Abdullah of Jordan to a private meeting where there were 5 patriarchs from the Orthodox Christianity, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, 3 cardinals from the Catholic Church, Rick Warren, who was assisted by Johnny Moore, who I'd met for the first time there, and my wife Roma and myself. And it was in 2013 we learned for the first time that there was some much more religious intolerance occurring throughout the Middle East. We listened and we decided, you know, there's some obligation as media personalities to try to raise awareness of this intolerance which turned into violence, and what could we do? Little did we know, this was 6 months before the worst of ISIS began. we were ahead of it because of King Abdullah and listening to first-hand accounts from Syria and Iraq of what was happening in these apostolic churches. As a result of that, we got more and more involved. But we knew we are merely television producers. And while we don't have enough experience, we could make a movie or a show, but this is a much more complicated issue. So we started to, we hired Johnny to work with us in television, and we decided Johnny would take 1/2 of all of his salary time and devote it to religious freedom and discovering what was happening and how could we as producers help to communicate. We'd already gotten to know the most important influencers around the world because of making the Bible series. So people took us seriously, and it went on from there. One such thing that happened, an Israeli girl, Paula Queskin, made a documentary about the atrocities of ISIS. And Roma Downey, my wife, became an executive producer, and this clip is just 3 minutes, and it was made with animation and explanation of something which you all know, but I think it brings attention to remind us of what awful atrocities happened and are continuing to happen across the region. And thank you so much, by the way, for allowing me, a television producer, to be here today to address this very, very important gathering. This ministerial is so important, and I think the world will realize how important that you've all gathered here today to shed light on this very important issue. Let's take a look at this clip.
One of the most terrifying things that is happening across the region in the Middle East is kidnapping of Christians, and it is especially horrifying for women.
فجي يوم أنا يم الباب مال بيتنا وقفت سيارة الشبابيك مالتها كانت سوداء مظللة يعني ما يبينون الأشخاص اللي بيها ونزلوا 2 أشخاص يعني أخذوني بالقوة وخلوني بالصندوق مال السيارة خطفوني تقريبا 15 minutes نزلوني بمكان هو مثل مزرعة وبيها بيوت مكان مال حيوانات دخلوني وشدوا ايجي ورجلي وخلوا بلاستر على حلقي بنفس المكان كان اكو بنات 2 وياي انه اللي وياي كانت دكتورة والثانية الطفلة الثانية كان عمرها about 13 years الدكتور about 35 36 like that طبعا اول شغلة سووها بي انه شعري كان طويل زينوني 0 تعذيب طبعا كانوا يضربونا يوميا whatever شنو ما يكون بيدهم كانوا يطفون جقاير برجلي بالسكينة كانوا يشيلون هذول السكاكين الصغار اغتصبوني البنية اللي عمرها 13 سنة باليوم الرابع اغتصبوها 6 كانوا صارت بليدنج وماتت أني بالذات كان يقول لي قولي الشهادة يعني قولي أشهد لا إله إلا الله وهاي حتى نطلعك يعني أني طبعا كنت ما أقبل ما أقول وكان يغلط علي ويغلط على المسيحيين ويغلط على المسيح حكوا ويا هاي الدكتورة اللي يمي كنا أنا وياها قاعدين لك على القاع حتى يقولوا لها أهلك ما قبلوا يدفعون الفدية فلوس واحد من عندهم قلع عينها يعني دخل سكينة بعينها وظلت تقريبا تنزف وماتت يعني right away ماتت بقيت تقريبا وراء 12 يوم 13 يوم بالضبط من الخطف. بعدين صارت هي اتصلوا بالفاميلي مالتي وطلبوا 100,000 من زوجي. هو قبل قال ادفع ما يخالف يعني. وهم أنا من قبل زوجي انه ينطيهم فلوس هم استمروا تعذيب ويضربوني استلم الفلوس من عندهم. حتى من استلم الفلوس ما فتحوا لايك الحبل كانوا شادي على ايدي وعلى رجلي. سلمهم الفلوس وعافوني بنفس المكان وراحوا.
Well, and think about this. My wife and I are Christian media personalities. We got into this through the friendship of King Abdullah of Jordan, a Muslim king. And the movie is made by an Israeli Jewish young girl. This shows what is possible by talking across religious lines and not dividing ourselves. And it's horrifying. And together we can try to make a difference.
Johnny, you have also traveled to the region. I've traveled there with Reverend Franklin Graham and my husband and seen much of what happens in there. And you hear these horror stories. And Franklin Graham has a missionary hospital there to deal with some of these injuries. But what were your thoughts and reflections traveling there?
Well, well, first of all, in a room like this, I feel like I'm sitting next to a hero. I'm surrounded by heroes, of people who were on the front lines of this issue before the world was really paying attention at all. And I remember being in that first meeting with Mark and Roma, and my heart was broken. I mean, here I was a Christian, being invited by a Muslim to learn the history about my own faith, as if Christianity began in like Jacksonville, Florida, or something. It was the very, very beating heart of our faith, and all this stuff was happening. I was so uneducated, I didn't know anything. And then to be able to work for someone like Mark, and Mark say, we have to do something about this. And one of the things that happened is a whole team was organized and sent to Iraq to meet with all the religious leaders, to meet with victims of the atrocities. It was all made possible by this Hollywood couple, the producers who cared enough to take some action, right? And the one thing that about a business person, like Mark Burnett, and I don't mean to talk about you with you sitting right here, but this is a fact. Like, the one thing that people don't have is time, and to watch the amount of time invested in this issue. And there was one refrain, again and again and again. Everyone we talked to, Yazidi or Christian or Mandaean or Kakai or whatever it was, all across the region, everyone said the same thing. They just said they felt forgotten. They just felt like they were, there was one wonderful nun who suffered so much in Mosul. We met her late one night, with I see Dr. Seipel sitting over there. We sat late one night with this nun, and she said, I'm suffering in silence. Why are you so quiet in the face of our genocide? It was just, if the story would have been told, we believe that millions and millions of people would pay attention, and millions of people did. It's like a stone was dropped in a pond by Mark and Roma, and it continues to reverberate. It's an amazing thing.
Mark, can I just jump ahead for 1 second, because I don't want to leave everyone I want to tell sort of a good story in the midst of of what we're probably going to hear and talk about over the next few days. In speaking with your wife, Roma, she talks about Northern Ireland. And she told me the other day about the Northern Ireland and about the Catholics, how that's so different. So let's jump ahead just to a quick good story.
Yes.
And you tell it for us, and she's not here.
Yes. My wife grew up in the Bogside in very, very Catholic Northern Ireland, in the city of Derry, which the British call Londonderry, but actually the Catholic nationalist Irish call Derry. And the River Foyle divides that city. And because of the Troubles, all Catholics moved to one side of the river, and all Protestants moved to the other side of the river, and proceeded to bomb and kill each other for decades and decades. But eventually, a peace process occurred with more tolerance towards the other's religion. It was a religious war. And today, across the River Foyle in Derry, is a bridge, a free-flowing pedestrian bridge, which is aptly named the Peace Bridge. And now prosperity occurs. Young people in this last 15 years have built businesses, go to coffee shops, nightclubs, normal lives, and therefore it'll be almost impossible for people with the wrong intentions to recreate the hostility between the Protestant and Catholics, because young people are experiencing the prosperity. So the good news is the Peace Bridge exists in Derry, and I am aware of it very much because I'm married to an Irish Catholic girl who, for those of you who have seen on television, my wife played Monica, the angel, on a series called Touched by an Angel, which was the #1 television series in America for 10 years, and still today is on television every day. We are in many, many places when we are in an airport or could have been here today, and people will come up to my wife to ask them to lay her hands upon them, even though she's only an actress. And she will say, I'm not actually an angel. But she knows maybe today that person who's hurting needs to believe she is an angel, and Roma, without any fakeness, will pray with them and love them. And this is sometimes the power of media, that you can reach people. In what all of you do, and you are all heroes, this is very, in American terms, Ivy League. You are all probably the most educated people around the world. Sometimes, though, you highly educated people don't know how to communicate to the masses properly. This is a fact. We are far less educated than you, but we are excellent communicators. Just on our television shows alone, 6 days a week, millions and millions and millions of people are communicating with us and via our shows. And therefore, we have an obligation. I'm grateful to share the story of Ireland. It gives hope. This was a situation in Northern Ireland, and me growing up in England, my wife says, she is Irish, my husband is English, but I don't hold that against him.
Is there some sort of lesson to be learned from Northern Ireland that we could sort of broaden out and sort of, as we look at all these disputes, these religious persecution around the world? What's sort of the catalyst for of this growing resolution?
Conversation, which is what you are doing, and shedding the light on a situation, because it just needs a foothold to have young people move themselves from eternal conflict. In some regions, obviously, and people here know way more than me, I'm simply a TV producer who has some kind of voice. And we are known, by the way, as Hollywood's noisiest Christians, which was said in a disparagingly way about us. But we said, okay, because we're not about just being Christian. We are best friends with Muslims, with Jews. We want to get to know Yazidis, Buddhists, everyone around the world. It's about, this whole thing is about tolerance. Just because someone believes in one way of worship and someone believes another, it's crazy to create violence like we saw on the screen. And you guys honestly are the biggest hope for the world. This ministerial is so important. I'd also like to mention, Johnny mentioned the word genocide. I think today, I could be corrected, but I think for the United States of America, the only current genocide designation officially is what ISIS did to these Yazidis, to certain other Muslims, and to Christians, to all of the above. And you should know, I think maybe it was in 2015 or 16, I can't remember, Johnny would know exactly the date, but there was a vote in United States House of Representatives, 393 to 0, for United States to declare what happened as genocide. And the current then Secretary of State didn't seem like he was going to do it. Because when America declares genocide, it means America's got to do something and spend money. So people are very reticent to, oh, well, I'm not really sure. They hadn't done that since Darfur. And my wife sent tweets out, some of them quite provocative, saying, please don't become a genocide denier. 2 days later, the Secretary of State designated and that was Senator John Kerry. Since then, Secretary Tillerson also reaffirmed that. So currently today, it is considered to be genocide. And that's a really important designation. And here's another thing. Just being Hollywood people and mentioning this makes certain politicians scared not to act. Because in the end, nobody wants to look bad in the media. But if no one mentions it in the media, things just don't happen. Much more convenient for the United States to not declare this genocide. But actually, we don't really give a shit if it's convenient or not. It doesn't matter. It matters to do the right thing. Today, me being here today, okay, I'm some Hollywood guy who's flown in to be with Greta and Johnny here and talk to you. I'm sure people in Hollywood say, what has he got anything to do with this? What does he know? How would he even dare to speak to you guys? But every little thing that gets said to make other people pay attention is important. Everything. Because this madness cannot carry on. It's just destroying the world. And you guys are the hope, the real hope. And thank you so much.
Johnny, one of the things that's... Johnny, Mark brings up the issue of an official declaration of genocide. The world you hear genocide, you heard President Trump, you heard Ambassador Nikki Haley talk about genocide having to do with the Rohingya Muslims they're now pushed out of Myanmar in the southern part of Bangladesh. I've been there now twice, and it seems to be sort of forgotten by most of the world. It's certainly not forgotten over there where there's a lot of suffering. But the term genocide is used, but there's no formal designation, so nothing kicks in. So what's the responsibility when you know others are being persecuted for religion? People talk about their own religion, but what about other religions?
I think if you're, in my case, a Christian, you're not only equally obligated to speak up for your own community, you are more obligated to speak up for other communities. Yes. I mean, this is our world. This is and over the course of this journey of the last few years, it's been amazing to me how there are so many misunderstandings between people of different political, positions, between different religious leaders of different types, even within Christianity, right? I mean, we have people that haven't talked to each other for thousands of years until in the last 2 or 3 years. It's an amazing, amazing thing. It's incredible if people get together and then they decide to act. Compassion requires action. You don't care unless you actually do something about it. And it could be a small thing. What I watched traveling around the world are business people and NGO leaders, people like Mark and Roma, taking a little extra time on the sidelines when they were in London or in the Middle East and having a meeting with local religious leaders and listening and hearing, and then choosing to take some kind of action or empowering those who did. And one of the things we've been hearing, actually, not just in the last year, but I first wrote on the Rohingya in 2015. Right? I mean, this has been a crescendoing situation. And I think that the tragedy of all of this would be that the terrible acts of 2014 has brought us together in an unprecedented way. When have we ever been in a room like this before? When has there ever been this type of momentum? When have these conversations ever taken place? And what would be an extra tragedy is if we wasted the lessons from the previous one or the previous ones. And right now we have a prime opportunity, not only as rebuild communities in the Middle East, working Muslims and Christians and Jews and everyone together and all the other faiths represented here, but to also turn our eyes to people who are bleeding today, for parents who are seeing their children starve today. And religion plays a huge role in that. The other lesson I learned was that religious leaders are often the only leaders left in fragile societies that can make any difference whatsoever. And I watched as we found people doing good work all throughout the region, and we just helped them a little bit more. They knew the victims. If they were a Christian, they weren't just serving Christians, they were serving the whole community. They knew what could make the most difference with the least investment in the shortest period of time. We listened. And I think that's the key. And the Rohingya are crying, and I wonder if we're listening.
Mark, we talk about the different areas. We've talked about Northern Ireland, Middle East, now Bangladesh, Myanmar. But what about religious persecution here in the United States through intimidation or outcasts? We have the benefit of the First Amendment, which is very potent, freedom of religion, which is meant to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. But how about here in the United States? And it may not be physical, but just intimidation.
I'm so grateful to be a citizen of the United States, as is my wife. And as we know, the first clause of the First Amendment of this great country talks about religious freedom. And having grown up in England and then moved to America, you know, apart from the Irish problem, which, you know, obviously I'm close to through my wife, it sort of seems like in this country, no one's going to persecute you over your religion, at least not on a big scale. People might say things, I suppose. People are uneducated, thoughtless, unloving. But in general, there's a pretty good protections in this country. And because of mass media, be it Facebook, you know, the news, cable news, if anything is said, people are going to call people out upon it and take some action. But I'm sure it exists in every society. But what we're talking about here is massive, crazy action being taken in Myanmar and in, you know, certain parts of the Middle East. But I also want to say something to you. So remember, the crazy thing is you never know, none of you know, the person you meet or the thing you do, which seems unrelated to the cause, how it will help. So here we are. I do think it's God's providence. For some reason, we make so many hit TV shows. Then we decide to make the Bible, which gets us to know the religious leaders. As a result of Touched by an Angel and the Bible, in March 2017, we got an unbelievable opportunity to have dinner at the Naval Observatory with the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, and the Second Lady, Karen Pence. What's the chance TV producers get to sit down in a double date with that level of power? So we're there, it gets to 9:30 at night, the dinner's over. We had with us something that had been given to us, which was a map of Nineveh, showing in Iraq where the aid which had been designated to be given by the United States had not at all reached the right people. We had this. It's 9:30. I could see the Vice President had a long day. We were grateful he even had dinner with us, with Karen, and we're saying goodnight. And I whispered to Roma, should I bring this up? And Roma said, yeah, let's bring it up. I said, Mr. Vice President, I know this is crazy, you're tired. Can I just leave some documents with you that I was given through the Hudson Group, a think tank, Nina Shea, who's probably here today. And it showed us a map of where the intended aid would go and where, in fact, it hadn't gone. So gave it to the Vice President. This is crazy. I'm a TV producer. I'm with the Vice President of the United States. Gave it to him. He said, thanks. I said, I don't know for a fact if this is accurate, but I've got it, and I feel I've got an obligation as a moral, conscious person, my wife and myself. Can you have, obviously, you're second in charge of the biggest power in the world. Can you have someone look into it? So, didn't hear anything. A couple of months later, my office gets a call, MGM. There's a call from the Vice President of the United States of America. I'm like, whoa. He said, hey, it's Mike. I said, hey, how you doing? He said, just want to let you know, you were courageous that night to give me that stuff because, you know, a lot of people wouldn't. I had the State Department look into this, and in fact, it is correct. The aid authorized by our government, our tax dollars, hasn't actually reached the right people. And I am now directing USAID to make sure this money gets to the right people. So this phone call is just say thanks for bringing it up. I say this to all of you, that even when it feels uncomfortable and you're a bit embarrassed, it was so worth saying that. Because since then, as of July 1st, Sam Brownback went over with Mark Green, Jeff Fortenberry, over to
Frank Wolf.
Frank Wolf, of course. They went on July 1st, sent by the VP, to go firsthand and go look for themselves to make sure the aid is getting there. And I'm glad to say it is improving. bureaucracy, as you all know, that's what you do, is hard to get things done. But it is improving, and I'm just grateful to be a tiny, tiny part of helping push to try to get together. And what I would do, personally, this is not just a government problem. The government, without the governments, you can't do anything. We all know that. But it's a private government partnership. And one thing I'd like to, when there's better security, I'd like to encourage, people from all over the world, go on trips over there and start to help rebuild these communities, brick by brick, and show the crazy people that you can't defeat what's right. So the message there is, even in an uncomfortable situation when you're a bit embarrassed, speak up, because it may be correct, and the worst would have been, no, your information is wrong. I'm sorry, I thought it was right. But in this case, it was correct information, and actions have been taken. And I'm so grateful to the Vice President for allowing us to dine with him and for taking action, and then bothering to even call me at my office to say, hey, buddy, you were right.
Let me ask you. Let me pose this to both of you. There are some things that are obvious. I've seen the churches in Iraq that have been destroyed and the markings. It's obvious. I've seen churches bombed in the Nuba Mountains by President Bashir of Sudan. Obvious. Those are obvious, and it's very easy to sort of point our fingers at those. But I'm sort of curious whether, at least for the Americans in the room, any self-reflection on it's sort of the sneaky stuff. And I've always sort of wondered, we take something, we're very proud of our First Amendment, whether it's freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, is that when the Book of Mormons came out on Broadway, it has won more awards, and it was on for seasons. I didn't see it, but struck me is that I didn't see a lot of Mormons thinking it was funny. And I recognize, I'm in the First Amendment business in the speech. And I wonder if we look at ourselves enough, because as we sort of identify the places in the world, are we not, is that something that, are we respectful?
But I would say to you, my experience of that, I did see the show, and in a satirical kind of way. It was a good show, really good show. And the Mormon community used that and turned it around to their advantage, because finally someone was talking about them and raising.
But did they like it to begin with? Did they want to be in that position?
I'm sure they didn't like it, but they're super smart, and you're given certain situations, and they turned it around, and good for them. I've never met a Mormon I didn't like. I've worked in Utah. My wife shot touched by an angel in Utah, and I was impressed how they turned a satirical piece of public art, which was directed at them, turned it around to be positive for them. So while probably, I suppose, we have to be super, super careful because it could have went the other way, but they managed to turn it around for them, I think.
And I think that presents an opportunity, for all of us. Like in this country, everyone has the right to be offended. Everyone also has the opportunity to choose to do something about it. And it's very easy for, I think, all of us to sort of boil down to our stereotypes about communities that we don't know and people we don't know. And that happened for me within Christendom. Growing up as an evangelical in the United States of America, I'm seeing some very close Catholic friends, and some Orthodox friends, around the table. I didn't know these people. I had a very limited, until I was in that meeting in Jordan and got to know, many of Mark and Roma's friends within the Islamic community throughout the Middle East. I didn't have those relationships. And what I often found is you can make a choice when things happen that are offensive or not offensive. You can choose to reach across and make a friend out of it, and so many problems in the world can be solved by a cup of tea. That's one thing I learned from Roma Downey. You just sit across the table from someone, get to know someone, and so I've kind of made it a habit myself that if someone says something that I find offensive, or even if they say something about me, which doesn't happen that often, people don't talk about me that much, but when
obviously
someone says something...
Obviously you're not on social media much then.
Yeah, when you get a choice. Like, you can actually reach out to that person and befriend that person, and every time you give an act of love in a moment like this, that's how you destroy this ideology. Every Christian, Mark and Roma, they sort of saw the refugee resettlement thing coming within the region, and yet the Christians, within the communities, they didn't want to leave. and yet people were leaving dangerously and illegally. You know, and very, very early on, like before the world's attention was arrested by that terrible picture of that little boy on that beach, you know, in Turkey, Mark and Roma had funded an entire team to study what it would take to get people out. And you know, eventually they helped a group of people, and that continues to this day, facilitating safe and legal transfers for people who were going to leave illegally, simultaneously working to rebuild the communities, and yet people who were going to maybe die on the way. Like 12,000 of those people have been resettled now, you know, just because they decided to, you know, take an action. And it wasn't a question of like, you know, helping Christians or not, or these people or those people. So when the world suffers, we all suffer. You know, every act of love is a sign that there is a better way. And I think 80-90% of the time, we agree with each other on almost everything if we just talk about it.
Do both of you feel like you're getting enough information from the media about these, what are obviously far away from Washington or California, these particularly hot spots where there is very violent persecution of people of various faiths? Do you feel, number one, that you're getting enough information, and just a factor into it is that lots of times this is throwing journalists into areas of danger, as well as these are horribly expensive to do this news gathering in these places that are remote from some of our news centers in the United States?
I would say because we are involved, the most bizarre thing ever, you make TV shows, suddenly you're involved in one of the world's crisis. Who knows why things happen? So yes, we are informed. I mean, Nina Shea at the Hudson Institute is very close to us, so we communicate all the time, and that's
you. What do you think, just
well,
generally?
No, I know. So yes, we are. But so here's where we turn this around, sir. You guys, you have serious responsibility. Yeah, your academics, your faith leaders. You have to speak up more, but you have to also speak up in a simpler way. Sometimes you guys communicate in such a complicated way, only your level of Ivy League, Oxford and Cambridge people can understand what you're saying. You have to speak, because most people are not as educated as you. And therefore, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Because if you don't do that, you won't get the message out. Obviously, across the world, no ordinary person wants to see things like you saw on the screen. Nobody wants that. That's crazy, crazy. But they don't really know about it. And I would say the media moves on so quickly to other factors. Therefore, the best thing you can all do is hire young, smart, media smart people to communicate for you with the knowledge and make it understandable. But Greta is completely correct. Yes, we know because we're in it. Most people don't know, and they certainly know who won the Super Bowl. They know who won the World Cup. Of course they do.
They don't know who won that hockey game, though.
That's right.
They're watching in Canada.
But they do know the Bible was on. Anyway, so yes, listen, you are heroes who are on the front line. My only encouragement as a TV producer is try to boil it down, make it simpler, and together communicate that actually the world's not going to put up with this. And here's the best gathering, the first time where you've all come to Washington, D.C., you guys can really make a difference. We can do our little bit as producers, but you guys can really make the difference. And I'm very, very, very grateful to be allowed to even sit here. It seems crazy as a media producer could even sit here. I feel, so I'm going to look back at this and think, wow, they must have been thinking, what on earth is that guy doing here? But I'm here, and I've got a big mouth, and I speak up.
And it's not just the negative, too. I mean, I think those of us who are close to the suffering, you know, we talk about the atrocities, and then people don't believe that there's another way. You know, and it's the positive stories, too. It's like, you know, I was looking at someone over there from Indonesia, and I remember a story I heard not long ago about the extremism was growing. So members of a Muslim community decided to help build a Christian church. Members of the Christian community decided to help build a mosque. And they named the church Ismail Church and they named the mosque Emmanuel Mosque. I mean, just the simple power of that image, and a simple story like that makes, you talk about churches being attacked, you don't talk about the Muslim security guard that died protecting the church. And that shows that there's a better way.
And maybe the media isn't picking that up if the rest of us in the room don't know that. Yeah. Probably. We don't necessarily know the good stories.
And I think that people get so accustomed to hearing the atrocities, they just don't believe the other exist. A lot of times it just takes persistence.
I guess the hope is that that reporting the atrocities would somehow provoke help, or to stop it in some way. But Mark, if someone were to approach you from this room 5 years from now and say, "I remember when you said what?" What's your one message that you want everyone in this room to get?
For you guys, this high academic intellectual group of powerful people, to find ways to communicate better to the masses. If you remember nothing else from this stupid English American TV producer, try and learn to communicate better to the masses in simple language that will motivate people to take action. And the second thing is, every little opportunity, you don't know where it leads. I didn't know that I'd meet King Abdullah because of a TV project, who then would say, "I know it doesn't sound like it fits that you're going to be in a meeting with 3 Catholic cardinals, 5 patriarchs, and the Grand Mufti of Egypt and the King of Jordan, but I have an instinct that you and Roma could be helpful." If we hadn't have gone to that, wouldn't have met Johnny, wouldn't have heard and got the instinct of what was going to happen with ISIS, wouldn't have worked with Chris Seipel, Nina Shea, and started to put together the understanding of this process. You never know where the meeting leads. And it's, if you think of it, it's almost like, you think back, when you're dating, your vision is open to meet new people. When you're married, it's kind of closed. Well, you guys have to be dating in the way to learn and meet people on this, even today, people you haven't met before. You don't know where it leads. And I and Roma are a perfect example of things that have gotten done. Think about, we played a role in getting genocide designated. We played a role in helping get the US aid to the right people. What do we know? Nothing. But we met people in meetings and it led on. So be open to ideas and relationships, and try and communicate in a much more effective manner. That's what I would beg of you.
You know what has struck me by what you both said is that the impact of the communication, because so many people don't travel to these places, and I don't know anybody who hasn't seen persecution up front, has not been moved by it. I don't, unless you're, of course, you're the perpetrator. But it's like the communication, so that people really do understand that these people just want to live and practice their faith like everybody else, and be free to raise their families. And the regrettable thing is that we can't bring everybody to these horrible locations with churches bombed out or people being run out. We can't do that. So the communication element is so important.
And I remember when Mark and Roma decided they were going to take big action, right? Because if you know Mark Burnett, it's like big action. It's big. It's the average successful television producer probably has like 1 or 2 television shows. When I first worked with him, he had 13 shows on TV. It was like number 1 for 5 nights a week, every single week. So he was going to do something. He was going to try to do something big. He was going to send a team. He was going to study it. He was going to act. It was going to transform people's lives. But there was a little clever thing that happened when we came back to tell the story. He tied it to a cultural moment. The phrase that we used was "winter is coming," because this is what everybody was telling us. And it was amazing how, and if you, the phrase, some of you recognize that phrase, some of you wouldn't. But at the time, with this is a. With Game of Thrones, this is a huge phrase everybody's paying attention. Everybody knew what it meant, and yet simultaneously, everybody in Iraq was telling us our biggest concern is the thousands of people on the streets. There's nothing going on. Winter is coming, And I watched the light on Mark and Roma's heads pop up. I mean, this is it. This is how to make that connection. This is how to make that connection point. And when you add it all together, all the organizations that they helped, that all the work that was done. I mean, in the end, it was like over maybe between 23 and $25 million of assistance eventually got to these people. You know, thousands of people out, tents, cities vacated, like amazing, amazing work. But it just took that bridge, and it requires partnership. You know, and if you just say the same thing a little differently, I mean, people pay attention. You know, they'll choose to act. People are compassionate. They want to help. It's not that people don't care. They just either don't know or they don't know what to do. And a lot of times we didn't know what to do. You know, it was people like you who told us what to do, and we just didn't, you know.
And who knows today? I'd forgotten that, actually. That's true. So everyone knew marketing. Everyone here has seen Game of Thrones. Not my show. I wish it was, but it's not. But everyone knows the phrase winter is coming from Game of Thrones. So who knows today? Maybe the Game of Thrones cast, maybe Time Warner, who own Game of Thrones, will send a message out. Hey, winter is coming. Let's help these people in Nineveh right now. Because winter is coming, and guess what? They're going to be really cold, and some of them who survived ISIS may die from the winter, because winter is coming. Let's try and help these people, and not just them. I mean, around the world. It's not just about that area. That's the area that I've got to know the most about. But in that case, winter is coming. It's not. And thank you for reminding me, Johnny, about that. That phrases work. You know, you need things like, if you look at my shows on Survivor, The Tribe Has Spoken, or in Shark Tank, You're Out. You know, the different phrases work on different shows. This is marketing. Marketing is necessary to communicate this, guys.
And thank you to Johnny and Mark. They traveled all the way from California just to spend this 40 minutes with you. That's how much they care about this topic and how important it is to both of them. So thank you both very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And now I get to make this announcement. We're going to break for lunch, and at 1:55 p.m. we will resume the afternoon program. Thank you to all of you.